Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
June 2nd, 2020. Honey, remember I'm having dinner with a couple of friends from work this evening. My wife mentioned as she hurried out the door to head to work. Okay, no problem. I'll find something for myself. Have a great time. See you later, sweetheart, I replied. My name is Ben Williams, and my wife, Kathy, and I have been married for 32 years. We have 2 grown children, our son, Robert, who's married to Teresa, and our daughter, Elizabeth. I feel incredibly lucky to have such a wonderful family. However, not everything is as perfect as it seems. June 9th, 2020. Kathy, who usually wakes up early to get ready for work, was still in bed. It was already 7:30. Honey, are you feeling okay? It's already 8:30. I asked her. No, I feel awful. I think I'm going to have to call in sick today, she replied. I went ahead and called her office, letting them know she was feeling under the weather and that we'd keep them updated on her condition. As the pandemic had been in full swing, we'd adapted our routines to stay safe. Kathy works for a large local construction company, which managed to stay busy despite the pandemic. She continued going into work each day, wore her mask, and tried her best to keep a safe distance from others. We were scheduled to get vaccinated in a few weeks. I work from home in the financial department of a large credit card company. It may not be the most thrilling work, but it pays well, and with Kathy's role as the assistant to the president of her company, we do well financially. I've been at my job for 33 years, ever since I graduated from college. Kathy has been working for her company for 25 years, starting after our youngest child began school. Her responsibilities involve managing everything for the president of the company, Roger Jones. We both enjoy our work and the people we work with. Kathy took her temperature, and it was 100.8 degrees. Honey, maybe you should get tested for COVID, I suggested. Oh no, there were a few cases at work. I think I'll go get tested. Yes, that's a good idea. I'll sleep in the other room until we know the results. But if you have COVID, I probably do too. She went to our local pharmacy for a test. We would have to wait about 2 days for the results. June 11th, 2020. I got my results. I'm positive, Kathy said. I'm sorry, honey, but at least now we know, I replied. You should call your office to let them know since you've been around your coworkers. Who did you have dinner with last week? They might need to get tested, too. Just Sally and the new girl, Regina. We took her out to welcome her to the company. I'll call them. Well, at least I work from home, so I can be your nurse, I said. I'll call our doctor to see if there's anything they recommend. Get back in bed, and I'll fix you some breakfast. The doctor was helpful, suggesting I give Kathy vitamin C, B3, zinc, and plenty of fluids. They also advised me to watch her breathing and take her to the emergency room if her fever got extremely high. I called our kids to let them know but assured them that we'd be fine. The pandemic has been rough on everyone, changing how we work, how schools and businesses operate. It's been tough, but we've been lucky until now. June 15th, 2020. Kathy was holding up okay. She had a low-grade fever and wasn't coughing too much, though she was extremely tired. I tried making meals she might like, but she'd lost her sense of taste. Not that it mattered much since I'm not the best cook. I started feeling unwell myself. Kathy, I think I need to get tested. Last night, I woke up soaked in sweat. I think I might have a fever, I said. I went in for a test and would know the results in a couple of days. June 16th, 2020. I felt worse, but still hadn't received my test results. I was almost certain I had COVID. I struggled to make breakfast and lunch for us both, but thankfully my sister, who lives nearby, offered to bring dinner. I'm so grateful for my family. They've always been there when I've needed them. June 17th, 2020. My test results came back positive. I felt so drained that I could barely get out of bed. Meanwhile, Kathy seemed to be improving a little. I managed to order groceries online, which helped, though it was still hard trying to prepare meals. June 18th, 2020. Members of our church heard about us being sick and dropped off food and drinks. It's heartwarming to know people step up when you're down. I was still extremely tired, with a low-grade fever that wasn't spiking, but Kathy had gained a bit of energy. June 19th, 2020. Kathy was finally fever-free and feeling somewhat better. She was now taking care of me. I asked her how she thought she might have gotten COVID, and she said she wasn't sure. The phone rang, and I answered. It was Sally from Kathy's work, checking on us. I thanked her and asked if she was doing okay. She said she was fine and mentioned she hadn't been out in public for a couple of months. I was surprised. Kathy had told me that she went out with Sally and the new employee, Regina. Trying to shake off my unease, I thanked Sally for her concern and asked if anyone else at the office had COVID. She mentioned that Roger, the company president, Had been out for 14 days, but would be returning soon. I felt a pit form in my stomach. Here I was, sick with COVID, and now dealing with the realization that Kathy had lied to me. As far as I knew, she'd never lied to me in all the years we've been together. But now, sick and feeling unsettled, I couldn't ignore the questions. Why did she lie, and what else might I not know? June 20th, 2020. I didn't sleep at all last night. I had to know. So, I sat down at my computer, pulled up our credit card accounts, and checked for any unusual activity. Kathy and I each had our own cards, and though I rarely checked hers, I had them set up to monitor because of a hacking incident a few years back. My hand shook as I opened her account. There it was, a charge from the Capital Inn on June 1st. The same night she claimed to be out for dinner with friends. The Capital Inn was 20 miles away. A storm of anger and disbelief surged through me. How could she do this? She was still at home, starting to feel better, completely unaware of what I'd found. When she came to check on me, she must have sensed something off. "You look worse than you did this morning," she noted. I just told her I needed to stay in bed and went to lie down in our son's room. She tried to bring me some soup, and although I wasn't hungry, I played along and pretended I wanted to sleep. After she closed the door, I lay there, feeling devastated and torn. As much as I wanted to confront her, I knew I needed her help to get through COVID. I still loved her, despite the hurt, and I knew I couldn't recover alone. June 21st, 2020. I woke up the next morning feeling worse, my fever higher than before. Kathy brought me some juice and a bagel, and I forced myself to eat a few bites as she sat there, watching me. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. "Kathy, how long have you been sleeping with Roger Jones?" Her face went pale and she stammered. Why would you think that? I love only you." "Well," I replied, "I know you went to the Capitol in the night you were supposedly out with Sally and Regina. Sally told me herself she wasn't with you." Kathy broke down into sobs and ran out of the room. At least she knew that I knew. I didn't have it in me to drag things out, to follow her or spy on her. That was never my style, and she knew it. She also knew that I expected the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A little while later, Kathy crept back into the room, her face still tear-streaked. "Are you ready to tell me about it?" I asked. She started crying again, asking for forgiveness. I'd had enough of sidestepping the issue. "Just tell me the truth, please. That's all I want," I said. "I think I deserve at least that." "You do?" She choked out between sobs. "There are no excuses. You're the love of my life. I've never thought otherwise. I know what I did was terrible, but you're the only one I want to be with. So where did things go off the rails in our marriage?" She broke down again, barely able to get the words out. "It wasn't meant to be anything more than something naughty." "Naughty?" I said, feeling my anger resurface. "Well, you could have told me. You know I would have done anything with you. I tried to introduce new things in our relationship, but you shut me down every time." "Why?" Kathy sniffled, trying to gather herself. "When Roger started spending more time with me, I felt more at ease. He's very intelligent and attractive, though no more handsome than you." I rolled my eyes. "I've worked for him for over 20 years, Kathy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know each other well, and we got comfortable. Over time, we grew closer, but it was never a reflection on you. There was never any criticism of you between us. You're my rock, and I love you deeply. Nothing could change that." "A fine way to show it," I replied, bitterness thick in my voice. "I'm sure you two had a good laugh at my expense." "No, never," she insisted, looking stricken. "I know I acted horribly, but you are my anchor, my true love. That's the truth. How long have you two been sneaking around? I'm done with this guessing game. Tell me the truth, or so help me God." "I will," she interrupted, her face crumbling. "The first time was 3 years ago." 3 years, I repeated, the words echoing hollowly in my head. "I'm such a fool." "No, you're not. It wasn't constant. We probably averaged once a month, right?" I said, feeling numb. "And here I thought you couldn't make this worse." I shook my head. "Just go. Let me sleep. We'll talk tomorrow." She stood for a moment, clearly wanting to reach out to me, but I turned my face away as she leaned down to kiss me. She left the room, softly shutting the door, her quiet sobs lingering long after she was gone. June 22nd, 2020. I've never felt this isolated. No kids around, and Kathy's presence only amplifies the loneliness. I keep replaying moments when Roger was there, acting friendly, respectful, even knowing what he was doing behind my back. I feel hollow and foolish, sick to my stomach from more than just COVID. Kathy knocked on the door, asking if I wanted breakfast, but I told her I wasn't hungry. She insisted on bringing in my vitamins, saying I needed them to recover. After she left, I tried to fall back asleep, but soon enough, she was back. Kathy has always been one to explain herself, to justify her decisions. This was no different. She stood by the bed, looking remorseful. Ben, from the moment we met in college, I loved you. It may have taken you longer to fall for me, but I've always been yours, she said softly, her eyes red-rimmed. I made a terrible mistake, kept making it, and then denied it to myself. There are no excuses for what I did. I was selfish, a horrible person, and you don't deserve any of this. I just looked at her, not sure if I could believe anything she said anymore. I called Roger and resigned, she continued. You're the only one I want, and I know that will never change. What did Roger say? I asked. Did he try to convince you to stay? She nodded. Yes, at first. But when I told him you knew, he understood it'd be impossible to keep working together. Suppose we get divorced. You'll need that job. Money's not an issue now, but a 50-50 split will change things fast. She burst into tears and left the room. I closed the door and locked it, not wanting to say or hear another word from her today. June 23, 2020. I woke up feeling even worse than the day before. My fever was relentless, and my clothes were soaked with sweat. Kathy, on the other hand, seemed almost fully recovered, while I felt like I was in a holding pattern, sick, drained, and caught in a nightmare with no end in sight. Kathy knocked on the door, asking if she could come in. Just give me a few more minutes, I replied. Eventually, I got up and unlocked the door. She entered with my meds, juice, and breakfast, hoping to continue our conversation. Sweetheart, I know I've hurt you deeply. I can't tell you how sorry I am, she said, her voice shaking. But please, I'm begging you, don't divorce me. I'll do anything. I'd live in the basement if I have to. What's wrong with you? I shot back. You had a 3-year affair, never worrying I'd find out. And now suddenly you're ready to do whatever it takes? I don't know who's the bigger fool, me, for trusting you all this time, or you, for thinking I'd just let this go. I'll start counseling, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to save this marriage. Well, it takes 2 people to save a marriage, dear, and I'm not sure I'm willing. Please, don't say that, she whispered, barely holding back tears. I know I can be a good wife to you again. I'll do anything to earn your forgiveness. Just let me focus on getting better right now. I need my strength back. I turned over and closed my eyes, exhaustion weighing me down. I didn't have the energy to keep fighting. We got through the rest of the day without any more words on the subject. I still didn't know what I wanted. I just wanted to feel well again. The hard part was, I still loved her, but I didn't have it in me to fight for her right now. If she still wanted me, maybe there was hope. If she still wanted him, there was no way back. I felt betrayed in the worst way. How do you trust someone again after that? I wished I felt well enough to escape somewhere, to be alone with my thoughts. June 24, 2020. This morning, I woke up feeling sore. My back aches from being in bed so long, but I'm too weak to move much. Even going to the bathroom is a struggle. Kathy made a special breakfast, an omelet with bacon and toast, my favorite. I wish I could taste it, or even smell it. I tried to eat, but my appetite just isn't there. She urged me to finish, saying she'd make whatever I wanted. I'd say a one-way ticket to escape this mess, but that might be a bit much to ask. Kathy told me she had booked an appointment with a counselor highly recommended by Sally, who went through a rough patch with her husband a few years back. She and her husband both loved this counselor, she said, and Sally thought it could really help us. I paused. Kathy, does Sally know about you and Roger? Oh no, not at all. We were very discreet, she replied. Sally's pretty perceptive, though. You really think you managed to keep a 3-year affair hidden that well? Kathy looked down, sighing. I'm so sorry, Ben. I feel disgusted with myself for hurting you like this. I want you to know that Roger wasn't a better lover or anything like that. He was just different. It was wrong, and I know he only saw me as a distraction. He's not interested in commitment. He dates other women around town. I'm begging you. Please, let me try to make things right. If he felt that way, why did you keep this up for 3 years? Did you ever come home from being with him and then come to me? No, never. I would never have done that to you, she said quickly. And I never brought him into our home either. Well, I'm relieved to hear you didn't bring him into the house, at least. Tell me, did you two ever try anything different, like new activities or experiences that we haven't? She hesitated. Once, he wanted to tie me up, but I said no. That's just not something I'd want. Well, that's noble of you, I suppose. It's clear you do have standards. They're just incredibly low, I said, unable to hold back my frustration. So, was he a good lover? She looked hurt but answered softly, "Why do you want to know? You're still the best. This was just a terrible mistake, one I regret more than I can say. I was nothing more than a distraction to him. Please, forget him. I only want you. I want you to get well so we can move forward. I'll never forgive myself for hurting you like this. How would you feel if I'd had a 3-year affair with someone?" I asked. "I'd be hurt and furious," she admitted. "I don't blame you for feeling this way. I did an awful thing, and you deserve so much better. Please, I'm begging you to forgive me. I need some rest now. Good night." I closed my eyes, signaling that I wanted her to leave. June 25th, 2020. I woke up early this morning in intense pain, especially in my back, and was struggling to breathe. Even though it was only 5 a.m., I decided it was best to go to the emergency room. I managed to dress and get myself to the car, opting to drive alone since Kathy wouldn't be allowed in due to COVID protocols. When I arrived at the ER, the nurses and staff immediately hooked me up to an oxygen monitor and began checking my vitals. Breathing was painful. Every inhale and exhale felt like an effort. They performed an EKG, a chest X-ray, and then a CT scan to investigate my lungs. I was placed on a gurney to wait for results, grateful for how attentive and thorough the staff were. An ER doctor came in with the news: "I have blood clots in my lungs." They explained I would be admitted to start blood thinners and 4 fluids for nourishment. Despite everything, I felt a bit relieved to know the cause of my pain and difficulty breathing. A nurse helped me into a hospital gown and transferred me to a COVID ward. I hadn't even brought my cell phone, so they provided a phone for me to call Kathy. When I told her about my condition, she started wailing, saying she thought I'd left her. She kept apologizing, saying she should have driven me here. I reminded her that she wouldn't be allowed inside anyway and told her I'd speak to her later, needing a break from her distress. Throughout the day, I was in and out of care with a steady stream of nurses, CNAs, doctors, and techs checking on me. The entire team has been so attentive. They're giving me medication and nutrition through IVs, which has made breathing a bit easier, though I still need supplemental oxygen. They encouraged me to eat, but I only had a small appetite, settling on some soup for lunch and chicken with rice for dinner. People often say hospital food is terrible, but my sense of taste has dulled so much, it doesn't matter. Kathy called back to apologize again and mentioned she had informed the kids. My son wanted to visit, but she told him visitors aren't allowed. I miss them deeply. It's been hard not seeing family much with the pandemic. When this is all over, I plan to have a huge backyard party and celebrate with everyone. Settling in for the night was challenging with my vitals being checked every few hours, midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., and a blood draw at 6 a.m. Though I feel well cared for, restful sleep seems impossible. The nurses, all wearing masks, shields, full coverings, and gloves, still manage to be so kind and patient. I can't believe how they do it, but I'm grateful for every one of them. June 26, 2020. After giving blood at 6 a.m., I managed to doze off for a bit longer until breakfast arrives. It's pancakes and bacon, a favorite of mine, but I'm not very hungry. Still, I eat most of it. The phone rings, and it's Kathy, crying again and asking how I'm doing. I tell her I think I'm improving, but I'm still very tired. She apologizes repeatedly and wishes she could be here. I believe her. Kathy has her faults, but she's compassionate, especially when someone is hurting or ill. She's the first to send a meal, a card, or help out with groceries when someone's in need. I know she feels deeply sorry for what's happened, but I also can't ignore that she and Roger are the ones who gave me COVID. Right now, I'm too sick to make any decisions about our marriage or future, but I'll have a lot to think about in the coming weeks. The doctors visit and tell me that my levels are improving, which is a relief. I can tell I'm getting better because I don't get winded just walking to the bathroom. Every little improvement counts. I have a call with my kids, my daughter, son, and daughter-in-law. Hearing their voices makes me feel good, and I can't help but shed a few tears when they tell me how much I mean to them. My mind starts racing about what to do after I get out of here. Do I leave Kathy, or do I try to work things out? I know this will affect the kids too, and that makes it harder. But her betrayal was so deep and painful, and I'm still processing it. Kathy calls again to let me know she's spoken to most of the family. They're all worried about me and love me. I ask her, "Kathy, how do you think Roger got COVID and spread it to you and then to me?" She starts crying, telling me she thinks Roger must have picked it up on a West Coast business trip and didn't realize he had it until he had already spread it. "When did you think you got it?" I ask. She responds, I was hoping it wasn't Roger, but he was the only one it could have been. She breaks down again, and I end the call. I'm so tired, but sleep is hard to come by. I doze in and out, with the TV on in the background. I only want to watch something light or sports. Everything else just makes me feel worse. Even sports is getting caught up in politics now, and I think to myself, can we just play the game? I know I need sleep, and I'm hoping I can get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, I'll think more about everything. June 27th, 2020. Code Blue echoed through the hospital, and doctors and nurses rushed into the room as the patient struggled to breathe. Ben Williams passed away at 1:45 a.m. on June 27, 2020, from complications related to COVID-19 caused by a blood clot in his lung. Despite efforts to save him, he could not be revived. July 1st, 2020. The church was filled to its capacity, with people outside trying to hear the service. Mourners had come from near and far to pay their last respects to Ben and offer support to his wife and family. The day was a beautiful early spring day, and it was touching to see how much Ben had meant to so many. He likely never realized the impact he had on others, but they certainly remembered the kindness he had shown them. His daughter, son, and daughter-in-law were there, while his wife, who was almost in a catatonic state, had been medicated and advised to stay home. It was unclear how many people knew about her secret, as Ben had never revealed it before his passing, and it seemed unlikely anyone else did either. Kathy lived for another 22 years, but withdrew from the world, becoming reclusive. She didn't have to return to work, thanks to Ben's life insurance policy and investments. However, she was never truly the same after his death. Her only joy came from spending time with her children, grandchildren, and one great-grandchild. Though she felt deep sorrow for losing Ben, she was also grateful for the many years they had shared together. Roger never faced the consequences while Ben was alive, but complications from his bout with COVID did not let him live long enough. A year after Ben's death, he died of multiple organ failure. Karma? Maybe, maybe not. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I wish I could describe in a fancy or unique manner how I found out my wife was cheating on me, but I can't. It happened just like a cliche from a poorly written story. I work at an auto parts factory, specifically making brakes. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I spend 8 hours a day from 4 to midnight, 5 days a week, operating an ancient machine. I'm decked out in safety gear, eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed shoes, and a denim apron. I meet my daily quota, and if I'm lucky, I might get a bonus at year-end. I have a cozy 3-bedroom house, a lovely wife, and 2 sons in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, things seemed stable. Until today. We have 5 stations assembling the brake shoes, all powered by compressed air. In the 8 years I've been here, we've had no issues with the equipment. However, today, halfway through the shift, the compressed air system malfunctioned. The air needs to be completely dry to function properly, filtered and dehydrated by automatic equipment. But today, it failed. The dehydrator system didn't expel the collected moisture as it should have. I'm no expert, but I know when moisture mixes with high-pressure air, everything freezes, and work comes to a standstill. Instead of waiting around, they sent us all home without pay, naturally. It's ironic, my whole life disrupted by high humidity. Upon entering the bedroom, I observed a scene where a hairy back was moving on top of my wife, Marcy. Naturally, I turned on the overhead light, realizing that Marcy wasn't asleep. She expressed annoyance at my presence, asking what I was doing there. I anticipated fear, apology, or shame from her, but instead she seemed angry. I inquired about her anger, to which she responded by accusing me of knowing exactly what was happening. She expressed regret that I had to witness the situation, but blamed me for not coming home on time. According to her, if I had been on time, the other person wouldn't have been there, and she wouldn't have been caught. The guy, previously obscured by the bed, now turned to glare at me with a smirk. Marcy half-heartedly pulled the covers up for modesty. My mistake was grabbing him as he got off the bed. He seemed much larger standing than lying down. For my trouble, I received 2 incredibly hard blows to the ribs. I never managed to land a punch. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, struggling to breathe. I think I got drub on the side of my head. And that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital emergency room, my ribs being bandaged by a medical technician. Marcy sat nearby, looking disgusted. The technician finished up and left the room. "Marcy, who was that guy? And why was he in our house?" "His name's Tony. He's a friend. and I invited him over. You were with him? You were with him in our bed? Our kids were sleeping down the hall. Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made a scene, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to get my sister to watch them so I could bring you here. What was he doing here? How many times are you going to ask? Tony and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. We were trying to keep it from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a sitter. Is it over now? No, it's not. Danny, you're a good dad and husband, but Tony's great in bed. I don't see why we should end it just because you found out. But I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids. I'm sorry, Marcy, that's not okay. It ends now. Danny, if you try to interfere with my relationship with Tony, you'll regret it. He smack you easily and he'll do it again. If you do anything, everyone will know you're a loser. Our friends, family, even your coworkers. Your life will be a nightmare. Don't you care what anyone thinks? You'd stoop that low just to hurt me? If I have to, but I doubt you'll risk it. Tony thinks you're a loser, and I agree. You'll have to live with it, Danny boy. Who is he anyway? Where does he work? He doesn't work. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car place on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did. He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and better with his fists. Why not marry him if he's so great? That's why I keep you, darling. Tony doesn't want kids, and I won't give mine up. You'll play house while he gets the love. You either accept it or everyone will know what a loser you are. And by the way, I'm moving your stuff to the guest room. No need to share a bed now that it's out there. Who watched the kids when you were with Tony? Usually Karen, sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Karen introduced me to Tony. I'll thank her later. They discharged me the following morning. Marcy wasn't around. I debated calling someone or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the kids at school and Marcy absent from home, all my clothes and personal belongings were stacked on the guest bed. I anticipated Todd and Terry might have questions about the situation, but I decided to let Marcy handle it. Setting up my new living space took less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind. However, there was no way I was going to let things unfold as Marcy intended. My first move was retrieving my old phone recorder from the basement. Although it only functioned with the landline, it was my only option. Marcy primarily used her cell phone for calls. Setting it up and concealing it behind some old paint cans took about 20 minutes. It was a starting point. Feeling terrible, I still mustered up enough to return to work. They offered me pain pills, but I hesitated to take them and then operate machinery. Opting for a couple of heavy-duty Tylenols instead seemed like the better choice. Marcy had seriously misjudged my relationship with my coworkers. I divulged everything that occurred the previous evening to them. They all brainstormed ideas, some better than others. It was reassuring to know my friends had my back. With an 8-hour shift ahead, each of us planned to devise ways to set things right. During our mid-shift break for supper, Glenn spoke up first. Any ideas? I don't have one, but I have a cousin who works for DeMarco. He does vehicle detailing and despises him. He could provide intel on the business, buildings, or work shifts, Glenn shared. That would be helpful, Glenn. Anyone else? Danny? Barry offered. I have 2 muskets and 2 pistols. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered, so there's no concern there. Thanks, Barry, but that's a bit more extreme than I was considering. Don't even want to hear my idea? Freddie interjected, followed by some laughter. Tell us, Freddie, come on, the group urged. I thought we could tie him to a tree, legs spread, and build a bonfire Indian style between his legs. Although Freddie's idea was well received, it was unanimously rejected. Kyle, who hadn't shared yet, faced everyone's expectant gazes during lunch. What? Don't give me that look. Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there. Go on, Kyle. I recall reading about a prison in Arizona that dressed love-making offenders in pink jumpsuits to humiliate them. I know Tony isn't a love offender, but something like that could embarrass him. You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? Wouldn't he just take it off? I was thinking if we could get to him, tie him up, and then spray paint him entirely with pink. That might do the trick, but he'd know who did it. You've got to knock him out first, then leave him tied to the chair until he's discovered. Do we use medications or just punch him? What's your plan? I can grab a taser. All you have to do is sneak up and shock him. You're making it sound easier than it probably is. How do we catch him alone? And how do we approach without him noticing? I don't have all the answers. Just thought it was an idea. The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down, so the other guys pitched in to help. Marcy was already in bed when I arrived home, keeping her promise not to bring him into the house. I had no clue what to do. Most of the ideas with the guys were like high school pranks. Might as well leave a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed genuine revenge. At noon, I got up. With the kids at school and Marcy moving around, I showered, shaved, and headed out. "Morning, husband. No kiss?" She smirked by the sink. Ignoring her, I left. Her comment didn't warrant a response. I needed lunch and alone time. The afternoon was spent killing time, figuring out how to get back at my wife's lover without causing trouble. Work awaited, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating at home, the only time with the boys, but I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Things were normal until supper break when Carl announced proudly that he had a taser in the car for self-protection. He reminded Danny not to forget to pick it up and asked if Danny had ever used it. Danny replied that he hadn't, but they could try it out, eliciting groans from the others at the table. Despite the lack of new ideas, they all showed support for Danny, which made him feel better knowing he had friends. At home, the routine was ordinary, although working the graveyard shift had disrupted sleep patterns. Todd and Terry, up earlier than usual, suggested going to Chuck E. Cheese, which Marcy didn't mind since they'd be out all day. Marcy informed Danny that he would need to take a few vacation days as Tony's friend Wally would be visiting from Detroit next week, and they planned to go on a cruise to Cancun. She suggested that if Danny couldn't take the time off, he should ask his parents. Danny expressed skepticism about Marcy's plans, questioning her intention to go on a sea cruise with two guys. Marcy defended herself, saying it wasn't as questionable as Danny implied, and explained that Wally would be sharing a room with Karen, who had been friends with him for years. Danny responded sarcastically, acknowledging that it seemed dandy. He made a mental note to thank Karen later. Despite being up early, it seemed like it would be a long day. To pass time before Chuck E. Cheese opened, we visited the nearby Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The end results weren't impressive, but they had a blast. I let them explore while I marveled at the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. Too late now. I was thrilled to find rows of designer paint and spray cans. There they were, 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't hold as much as the ones at Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink. It was the only place I'd seen paint that color in a spray can. I took it as a sign and bought all 6. Todd chose a monster truck kit, and Terry picked a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were news to me. Before leaving, I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic cable wraps about 18 inches long. They looked sturdy enough. Chuck E. Cheese was ready by then. The kids spent about 4 hours and 2 pizzas there before they got tired. We fed ducks in the park with cheap bread before heading to my parents' house. They were glad to have us for supper and the evening. Todd and Terry watched TV most of the night, while I briefed Dad on the situation with Marcy. I realized I was telling people about it before Marcy could. Her threat seemed less significant. Dad promised to take care of the boys, which eased my mind. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to say we'd be staying at my parents' house. Got the machine. After a big breakfast at IHOP, we found Marcy still in bed. I started mowing the lawn while the boys worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them go. I decided to make a full day of the lawn work, including edging and pruning. Things didn't go as fast as usual because I found myself chatting a lot. I had hedge clippers but borrowed a set from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, loved gossip. I warned Mike about unfamiliar cars at our house because Marcy would entertain male friends. If they got rowdy, he should call the police. It was hard for me to manage things since I worked nights. Larry Finley, from the local church board, lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Marcy's recent behavior. Of course, he was curious about what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. In just 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I headed to Rosie's Cantina and treated myself to the priciest dish on the menu. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already filled him in on the situation. I crashed on his couch for the night. My wife had a grand scheme. She intended to coerce me into compliance by threatening to expose me as a betrayed man. If I didn't endorse and back her infidelity, she'd make my life hell. It was an intriguing plan, but it had many flaws. In less than a week, I'd already spilled the beans to everyone. That pretty much nullified her threat. I also managed to portray her as a cheap tramp more effectively than she could have imagined. I don't think she foresaw any backlash. The next afternoon, when I stopped by the house to change for work, Marcy was waiting for me, visibly upset. She mentioned that Karen had informed her about rumors circulating among the neighbors that she was running a brothel at night. I reassured her that I had simply told the neighbors that she might have male visitors while I was at work and advised them not to be concerned about it. However, Marcy insisted that the rumors were spreading differently and asked who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had spoken to everyone, thinking it would be easier that way. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the rumors. Marcy expressed frustration, feeling like the rumors were making her look bad. In response, I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me appear like a betrayed man. Marcy apologized but said she had to leave for work. She mentioned that she had managed to spend some time with the boys before leaving, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. Glenn had some great news that night. Continental Classics shut down at 9 o'clock on Thursday night, so Tony could personally handle all the paychecks for Friday. He hated being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was gone. Kyle took a few minutes to show me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to test it. The plan was falling into place. If I got caught, and I fully expected to, I'd likely face jail time. I didn't care. Tony DeMarco needed to be humiliated. If I got arrested, I'd ensure all newspapers and TV stations got the full story. Any publicity like that would crush him, or at least infuriate him enough to make a mistake. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a meal at home since that first day. Finally, Thursday arrived. I arranged for my truck to have a dead battery, so Kyle picked me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered the brake guys too much. As long as we met our quotas and maintained quality, they left us alone. The OSHA requirements for the job would work in my favor. With our apron gloves and welding goggles, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys would take turns covering for me at my station. One of their posts would be empty, but no one really cared. Toilet breaks were normal and unregulated. The main thing was to create the illusion that I never left. I entered the staff entrance at Continental Classics and headed directly to the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone quickly checked the area before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I donned latex gloves and exited the restroom into a dimly lit office area. Tony's desk overlooked the showroom, so his back was turned to the door. It seemed easier than I had anticipated. Despite having a computer in front of him, he was using an old adding machine with paper tape. He didn't hear my approach. I zapped Tony with the taser on the back of his neck. His body idioted upright, and fearing he might turn around, I administered another shock. This time, he twitched a bit before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps on each limb and brought along an old necktie to use as a blindfold. He cooperated without resistance. I rolled his chair to the showroom window. He would be perfectly visible when his staff arrived for work in the morning. The paint, a pretty pink color, required more coats than expected. It was absorbed into his clothing quickly, necessitating at least 3 coats in each area to achieve the desired effect. I just had enough paint, but barely. He looked quite striking in pink. After completing the task, I carefully packed everything back up. I had anticipated Tony waking up during the process, but he remained still. I had also planned to remove the necktie blindfold before leaving. I checked my watch several times, well within the time frame I had set, but I still wanted Tony awake before I left. 5 minutes later, I started to worry. I attempted to feel for a pulse without success. Perhaps the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed one glove and tried again, but still no pulse. Trying to find a pulse on his neck like on TV yielded nothing. I removed the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip. No blink, no reflex. Needless to say, panic set in. I regained my composure, put the latex glove back on, and wiped everything I might have touched. I pocketed the necktie and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked odd. The white skin under the necktie made him resemble a pink raccoon. After ensuring I didn't overlook anything, I left for work. On the way back to the shop, I disposed of all items, including the taser, in a storm sewer. 10 minutes later, I was back at work making brake shoes. No one noticed my absence. After the shift ended, I informed the guys of what happened. They were all accessories, so I was confident nobody would speak up. Freddie was impressed, and none of them seemed concerned. Kyle drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I didn't manage to sleep as long as usual. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What on earth did you do? What did you do, you little idiot?" Naturally, I just rolled over and gave her a puzzled look. "What in the world are you talking about, woman? Tony's dead. Karen called and said they found him in his office this morning. Dead. I suspect you had something to do with it. And I'll make sure you pay, you idiot." That was the second time she called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was pretty clear I wouldn't be getting any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and went to the bathroom. Not eager to face Marcy's wrath, I took a long hot shower and shaved slowly. I even put on a bit of aftershave just to annoy my dear wife. I never made it to the coffee pot. A tall man stood in the living room conversing with Marcy. His hair was closely cropped and he wore a dark suit. The witch had called the cops, no doubt about it. I shook my head and headed into the kitchen for my first cup of the day. Marcy wore a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed suit. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green with an E. I'm here regarding the pass-away of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife mentioned you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Sure, no objections, but not here." "What do you mean? If you want to talk, let's do it in your office, not in my home. Is that okay with you?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was pretty sure she had expected to be part of the conversation. "Your car or mine, Mr. Mercer?" "I have a few other things to attend to, so I'll meet you there." "Any particular office?" "Second floor, rear room 206. Just turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you shortly." Marcy was seething as I put on my shoes. I never got around to finishing the coffee, so I dumped it in the sink. I turned and smiled as I walked out the door. "I guess you'll get what you wanted, sweetheart." "What are you talking about? What do you mean, Danny?" 10 minutes later, I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green asked all the pertinent questions, and I provided suitable answers. He delicately broached the topic of the affair without dwelling on it or being overly blunt. Naturally, I had to acknowledge having a motive, but I insisted I never had the opportunity to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I endeavored to be cooperative without being cheeky. I think he appreciated my efforts to make his job easier, even though I couldn't provide a definitive answer. The most intriguing part of the conversation was learning that Tony passed away due to a heart issue. He had a pacemaker put in a couple of years back, which apparently didn't mesh well with the taser. They deduced the taser's involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt remorseful about Tony's pass away, yet there was also a sense of relief. Detective Green gave me the customary "don't leave town" spiel and mentioned he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never imagined needing an alibi for anything. It was kind of thrilling. We parted on good terms, and I sensed that Darnell Green was supportive, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick meal, I tuned into the TV news. There was a segment about the demise of a local businessman, noting he had no relatives in the area. I withdrew funds from the bank accounts and then treated myself to a nice breakfast. There were tasks to attend to at home. Marcy wasn't around when I returned. It took me half an hour to relocate all my belongings to the master bedroom and hers to the guest room. The guest room had limited storage space, so I piled her things on the bed for her to organize. I checked the telephone recorder in the basement, finding nothing noteworthy. I gathered banking, insurance records, and other vital documents. Thankfully, Marcy's Volvo was in my name, simplifying matters. I stashed everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I phoned work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my beloved wife arrived. She seemed taken aback to find me at home. It was time to set things straight again. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What's this? Who do you think you are?" Her response was a smirk. "Tell me, damn it, what's happening, Marcy?" "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. I suggest you start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be disposed of. Any questions?" "I can't fit my stuff in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room anyway. What do you mean, disposed of?" "If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't need it. This is non-negotiable. Danny, you're in trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later." Idiot. That was the third time that day she called me an idiot. I must be making some progress. While Marcy was occupied in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I meticulously collected what I wanted. First, I took her cell phone and car keys. From her wallet, I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I replaced the remaining items. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her Volvo to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few $1,000s. As I headed into Taco Bell for lunch, my cell phone rang. "You witch! Where's my cell phone and where's my car?" I was relieved she didn't call me in schmirk this time. She was calling from the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder later. I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promise to get you another car once I'm out of jail, I said, ending the call and turning off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized getting a lawyer was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to stay married. But I had to wait. I was next in line to order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I went straight to my sons, ignoring Marcy. I did glance her way a few times and noticed she wasn't happy. The boys eagerly showed me their models. When Marcy began preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed, Marcy's in the master bedroom. I chuckled, but chose not to argue. She seemed stubborn and resolute. Marcy instructed the boys to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to discard her belongings, but that seemed too immature. Red Lobster was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but the cheese rolls remained my favorite. After finishing, I switched on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. The first call I received was from my wife, who asked how she could go to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I would take her when I returned, and suggested planning our shopping trips for Saturdays when I was off work. I expressed a preference for her not to go alone and mentioned another call coming in, prompting me to end our conversation with plans to talk later. The second call was from Kyle, who informed me that Detective Green had spoken to the entire crew individually and as a group, and everyone's stories had checked out. He mentioned that Tom Tingle, the floor manager, had strongly supported him, emphasizing that Kyle couldn't have missed work. After arriving home just in time to tuck the boys in, I found Marcy sitting on the couch with wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's and settled into my recliner, hoping to initiate a conversation. I asked Marcy about her plan to paint me as a villain, which abruptly ended the conversation. Marcy finished her wine, left for her bedroom, and I realized she didn't actually want to talk. Disappointed, I grabbed my beer and checked the recorder. The first call was to her sister, no cover-up there. It seemed Marge knew about the affair with Tony and supported Marcy. That was reassuring. The next call to Marcy's mom was different. Mom was clueless. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's, and I was jealous because I'd been pursuing Karen for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. She contacted the cell phone company to inquire about a replacement for the phone I took, but had no luck. Then, she reached out to the DMV to report the loss of her driver's license, and they advised her to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I'll give her this. She was quite active. The final call on the machine was to Karen. Even though Karen lived nearby, they opted for a phone call instead of meeting in person. It worked out in my favor, of course. From that call, I gleaned two important details. Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Marcy planned to keep a low profile until his arrival. The next day, the boys and I were up early and out of the house before Marcy woke up. We returned home after lunch, and Marcy insisted I drive her to the grocery store since she lacked a car and driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and immediately called Marcy. Their conversation was intriguing. He believed Marcy's story and vowed revenge. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he was adamant about seeking justice. He provided Marcy with his contact information and instructed her to call him the following day. Afterward, Marcy excitedly phoned Karen, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. The transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, warranted such a drastic change. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger. Knowing the lawn needed mowing again, I used it as an excuse to avoid Marcy the next day. Around 11 o'clock, Marcy's parents arrived to pick up the boys for an unplanned sleepover. But I didn't object. Grandma Wilcox assured they'd be back in time for school tomorrow. Eager to check the phone recorder, I postponed until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to Denny's. Marcy made no mention of my absence from home. She and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's pass away, which seemed somewhat absurd to me given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Wally entering the house through the back deck's sliding door, while Marcy assured him it would be unlocked if all went well. It was meant to appear as a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Marcy and Karen were to call emergency upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, receiving a finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the evening. Before leaving, I borrowed Dad's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-gauge, for the upcoming event. Marcy was in bed when I returned home, her light on, presumably reading. The lone message on the answering machine came from Karen, boasting about her and Wally's pleasurable afternoon. Before signing off, she assured Marcy of her readiness later that night. It took me roughly 20 minutes to swap out the buckshot in the shells with rock salt using a leftover bag from last winter. My intention wasn't to eliminate Wally, but merely to slow him down. Honestly, I didn't wish damage upon Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a bad heart like Tony did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Wally might spot me. I had to assume Marcy left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and mussed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been preferable, but since none was available, I settled for a drink, waiting in my recliner with the cell phone close by. He didn't arrive until after midnight. Upon spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency, reporting an intruder in my house and expressing fear for my life, keeping the line open. The patio door slid open quietly, revealing Wally. I waited until he was fully inside the house before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid accidental pass away. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the deck's side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't eliminated him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have caused quite the sting. I was amazed at how deafening the musket blast sounded indoors. My ears were ringing intensely. When I flipped on the lights, Marcy was already in the living room screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were unintelligible. I approached to check on Wally and noticed a Ruger .22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Marcy continued to scream, so I aimed the musket in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived. There wasn't much discussion. I placed the musket on the floor to avoid any confusion about the situation. Pointing to the phone, I informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Marcy in the bedroom. Bringing her into the living room, the officers realized their mistake. Despite their attempts to quiet her, both Marcy and I were unsuccessful. Finally, a large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Karen standing with some neighbors outside. I grinned at her and gestured across my throat, but she quickly walked away without reciprocating. The EMTs arrived for Wally as Detective Green showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back. It wasn't intentional sass, but I couldn't resist. The female officer escorted Marcy back inside so she could dress. After getting dressed, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Green agreed to let me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he smiled at me again. It was daylight when Green released me. Although we only spoke for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. One of the police cars drove me home. I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal, and even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Wally seemed to have borne the brunt of it. I estimated it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I went to bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. After relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find my amiable detective seated at the table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping fresh coffee, which I presumed he brewed while I slept. Having had my fill of coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and settled across from him. How he entered the house eluded me. "You're quite the chill guy, Mr. Mercer," he remarked, his eyes fixed on the paper. Uncertain how to reply, I remained silent, unsure if he was toying with me. Finishing his coffee, he finally spoke. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. I'll treat, unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day." Heading to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch comprised 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me in washing them down with a beer. As the silence grew palpable, he broke it. "You were itching to ask me questions, weren't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Funny, I had the same thought about you," I retorted. Green flagged down the waiter for 2 more drafts. "I spent the whole night grilling you. Now it's your turn." "All right, first off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of inquiries, but delving deeper risked exposing myself. Opting to retreat, I remarked, "Nice to see Marcy's folks rallying for her." "As I won't be." "No more questions, Detective Green. But if you need to spill, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams? You mean Wally? That earned me a smirk. If I did have such a recording, would you want it? I'm unsure. If things unfold as I anticipate, it may not matter. But if they get skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be troublesome, right? You're onto something. I'm just trying to streamline my job. I'll manage without a hypothetical tape. I nodded slightly. Thanks, Danny boy. I think I should drive you home. Your boys will return from school soon, needing their father. We reached the house just as Todd and Terry disembarked from the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective companion. Eager to see his badge, they expressed interest. However, the mood shifted when Green inquired, "So, who built the tugboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck!" Todd exclaimed proudly, while Terry declared, "I did the tugboat. Want to see it?" With a promise of possibly inspecting them another time, Terry departed, leaving me stunned as he walked to his car with a satisfied grin. He knew about the pink paint predicament, holding the upper hand. Helpless, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the boys didn't inquire about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Marcy's dad called, seeking assistance to raise bail money for her release from jail. Politely declining, I wondered if he truly comprehended the situation, but at least he tried to be a supportive father. Inquiring about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We assisted in loading Marcy's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without issue. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Karen's driveway, vanished the next morning. Marcy never reached out, leaving me to glean updates from the daily newspaper. I felt deliberately excluded from the unfolding events. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all blame on Wally, who countered it was her idea. Both accepted pleas, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally receiving 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were consulted regarding Wally's silencer, but postponed action until he completed his initial sentence. Detective Green didn't require the tape and ceased mentioning it. Karen disappeared without a trace. My dad reclaimed his musket, jesting that I might need it again. Chuckling, he mentioned Marcy served me with divorce papers. Once her jail term began, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents as I couldn't balance work and caring for the boys alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, and although offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison. During these visits, I remained in the car, typically less than an hour, sometimes outdoors in good weather, observing them through the chain-link fence. I refrained from discussing the visits with them and requested they not share any details. It seemed to suit all of us well, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes." "I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware. But why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, damn. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me. Now this." "I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if we could meet. There are things I need to address. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where should we meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a moment to respond. "Let's meet Saturday at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my sons. They enjoy old cars." Unsure of her intentions, I felt safer in public with the boys. I didn't want to use them as a shield, but I believed she'd be less inclined to cause trouble with them present. I speculated about her potential grudge, assuming she might be Italian and hot-blooded. Eventually, I concluded I was overthinking and needed a beer. I called Detective Green for insight. He chuckled, advising me to meet with her and stop fretting. Easy for him to say, as he wasn't the one who eliminated her brother. Continental Classics was an expansive and impressive establishment. Apart from the main showroom, they possessed 2 sizable buildings in the rear, housing cars awaiting restoration or awaiting display on the showroom floor. It came as a shock when we arrived to find them hosting a grand opening celebration. I hadn't anticipated it. There were many aspects of the event that puzzled me. Terry and Todd appeared torn between the cars and the complimentary items. My first impression was the scent emanating from the popcorn machine. A man clad in floppy shoes and a rubber nose distributed small bags of freshly popped kernels, while adjacent stood a soda machine and another clown manning a hot dog cart. It seemed the boys wouldn't require lunch today. Angela Hawkins wasn't difficult to identify. The moment I observed her striding purposefully towards me, I recognized her immediately. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage: dark hair, eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While a gentleman might not have noticed the latter, they were accentuated by her stature, barely reaching 5 feet. Tony was colossal, whereas his sister was short and stout. I felt a twinge of anxiety as she approached, then noticed the miniature version of her by her side, a young girl of about 10, bearing a striking resemblance to Angela, albeit with lighter hair and naturally lacking any hips at all. It appeared my hostess employed the same tactic as I did for security, as we both relied on our children. As she closed the distance between us, her hand extended in a friendly gesture. "Daniel Mercer, I presume?" It felt only natural and polite to shake her hand, reminiscent of a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingstone. Though she wore a smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which eased my own apprehension. I stood there silently, prompting her to continue speaking. It felt as though I were deliberately being excluded from the loop. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all the blame on Wally, who in turn claimed it was her idea. Both eventually pleaded guilty, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities became involved due to the silencer Wally possessed, opting to await the completion of his initial sentence before taking further action. Detective Green never revisited the issue of the tape. Karen disappeared without a trace. My father was pleased to retrieve his musket and joked that I could borrow it again if needed. He chuckled as he said so. Marcy served with divorce papers. Upon commencing her jail term, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. Selling the house, I returned to live with my parents as I couldn't juggle work and childcare alone. My co-workers welcomed me back, and though offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison, waiting in the car during their brief meetings, sometimes outdoors in good weather. I refrained from questioning them about the visits, asking them not to divulge anything. This arrangement seemed to suit us all well, and everything appeared to be running smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello? Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes. I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green recommended I call you. There are things we need to discuss." "I understand, Detective Green, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, darn. Just when I thought all this was over. Why does this have to happen?" "I don't think that's a wise idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if you could meet me. There are some things I need to say. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where would you like to meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable works." It took me a moment to decide. "I'll meet you Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my 2 sons. They enjoy looking at old cars." I didn't know her intentions, but felt safer in public with my boys. I wasn't using them as a shield, but hoped she'd be less likely to do anything. I realized I was overthinking. I needed a beer. I called Detective Green, who laughed and advised me to meet with her and stop worrying. Easy for him, he didn't eliminate her brother. Continental Classics was an impressive place with a main showroom and 2 large buildings at the back for cars needing restoration or display. I was surprised to find they were having a grand opening celebration. There were many things I didn't understand. Terry and Todd seemed torn between the cars and the freebies. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell of the popcorn machine. A person with floppy shoes and a rubber nose was handing out small bags of hot popped kernels. Nearby, there was a soda machine and another person with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't need lunch today. It wasn't too hard to recognize Angela Hawkins. I knew right away as she walked directly toward me with a slow and determined stride. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage: dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. I suppose a gentleman wouldn't notice her hips, but they were emphasized by her height, barely 5 feet tall. Tony appeared imposing, and his sister had a sturdy build. I felt a bit uneasy as she approached, but my apprehension lessened when I noticed the smaller version of her by her side, a young girl of around 10 who closely resembled Angela, albeit with lighter hair and a less developed physique. It seemed we both found comfort in the presence of our children, a somewhat pathetic realization. As she came closer, she extended her hand in a friendly gesture, addressing me as Daniel Mercer. I shook her hand, feeling a sense of familiarity akin to a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingstone. Despite her smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which helped ease my own discomfort. I chose to remain silent, prompting her to continue speaking. She expressed her intention for both of us to learn the business thoroughly enough to take control, emphasizing the need for me to assert myself in the meantime. Angela admitted that she was a nice person, which led Tony and his wife to attempt to take advantage of her. Her tone became more relaxed as she remarked on the unsuccessful outcome for Tony and his wife. I found her comment oddly amusing and chuckled. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Angela offered better pay and benefits compared to my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, although I hoped they would. Todd looked unwell on the way home, likely from too many hot dogs and sodas. Meanwhile, Terry seemed to enjoy himself, chatting with Carla more than inspecting cars. A positive sign. Todd got sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started work the following Monday. Things unfolded as Angela predicted. I quickly familiarized myself with the operation and gained support from employees, particularly Glenn's cousin, my staunchest ally. Most wanted the business to thrive and readily reported any misconduct. Angela delegated firings to me, a task I surprisingly relished. I lived up to my reputation. Detective Green visited for coffee often, though our conversations remained light. Eventually, he shared a personal story. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Philly. I returned home one day to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I attacked them and threw my wife out. The department gave me the ultimatum to quit or be fired. A week later, I found work here. Before leaving, I ensured my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details. At least now, I understood why he seemed to favor my side. The boys agreed not to inform their mother about my new job. During visits, they casually mentioned the lengthy drive, but understood it was unavoidable. I felt it was crucial for Marcy to see her sons, not for her sake, but to inflict emotional pain. I know it's a terrible way to involve your kids, but I derived some twisted pleasure from it. Angela and I were spending more time together at and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted on taking her and Carla to Nobles Grove. Mostly we stayed close to home due to our living situations complicating any romantic prospects. While I was keen on a closer relationship with Angela, it wasn't feasible. I still resided with my parents and the boys while Angela and Carla shared a small studio apartment. Since the business exceeded expectations, Angela discussed purchasing a house. She spent hours online searching for the perfect one. My first realization came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the boys. Danny, I think it's important for each boy to have their own room. It's better to address this now than later. Don't you agree? I recognized the question as a setup and sensed Angela viewed me as more than just an employee. The possibility of romance seemed promising. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. A split bedroom plan would also be beneficial. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom, I added before leaving the office. Angela sported a small smile, marking our peculiar relationship. Though we never engaged in lovemaking or closeness acts, I felt closer to her than I did to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Marcy, we all celebrated at Red Lobster. While the kids were unaware of the reason, Angela knew. Later at the apartment, while the kids watched a pay-per-view movie, Angela kissed me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled until Carla caught us. Whoops! Sorry, Mom, she said before adding, it's about time. Angela and I behaved ourselves for the remainder of the evening, eagerly anticipating what lay ahead. The following day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I decided to take an extended lunch break and return to the apartment with a sense of pent-up energy. We didn't resume work until just before the end of the workday. As time went on, we continued to take numerous extended lunches, and Angela became increasingly serious about finding a new house. Detective Green would often drop by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a liking for a Studebaker Hawk previously owned by Roger Ebert, and Angela offered him a good price for it. Unexpectedly, Angela requested that I take her to see Marcy. Despite our reduced number of trips, Marcy didn't seem to object. I asked if there was a specific reason for the visit, to which Angela replied, closure. Although I understood the term, the concept felt somewhat abstract to me. I offered to accompany her, but Angela insisted that I simply drive her there, stating that I didn't need to be present during the conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at Muncie. Since the inmate visits were held outside, I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were old friends. Things took an unexpected turn. After 5 minutes, Marcy's smile vanished, and she leaned across the picnic table, scowling at her visitor. Meanwhile, Angela remained cheerful. Suddenly, Marcy lunged across the table, attempting to grab Angela. The commotion was swiftly quelled by several guards who escorted my ex-wife back into the building, where she protested vehemently. Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before departing the visitors area. She was still grinning when she returned to the car. "What was that all about?" I questioned. "Your ex-wife is quite touchy," Angela remarked with a hint of amusement. After driving for several miles, she turned slightly, straining against the seatbelt. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I admit I may have misled her a bit at first. "How so?" I inquired. I told her I came from Baltimore seeking revenge. That seemed to satisfy her because she thought I meant against you. "Absolutely. What I really meant was that I intended to seek retribution against Tony by assuming control of his business. I suppose you can still seek revenge against a deceased person, right?" "All right, but what caused her to become so upset?" "She wanted specifics, like when, where, and how." Naturally, I knew she was referring to you. Now I was becoming intrigued. I informed her that it would take a considerable amount of time and inquired if she wished to be kept updated on the progress. She eagerly consented and insisted on knowing precisely how I planned to accomplish it. When I divulged my strategy, she became furious. She completely lost her composure. It was quite remarkable. All right. How on earth do you plan to eliminate me?" "No, I genuinely want to know." Her smile widened. "I informed her that I intended to exhaust you to pass away." "That's all?" "Indeed. Isn't it amusing? I thought she might become angry, but I never anticipated her reaction to be so extreme." There was a brief moment of silence. We both sat there smiling. I felt immensely proud of her. "When do you intend to commence this endeavor?" "As soon as we arrive at the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot. It was a carnal ceremony in the backyard of our new residence. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation along with a brief note enclosed. "Everything is proceeding as planned. You should be deceased in 40 or 50 years.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world are you watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Nathan Pierce stood at his office window, 40 stories above Seattle's bustling financial district. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk, where the latest prototype of Pierce Innovations' revolutionary cardiac monitoring device lay. His fingers traced the smooth edges of the device that promised to revolutionize early heart attack detection. A soft buzz from his phone interrupted his thoughts. Claire's message lit up the screen. "Meet me at La Maison Rouge at 7. Remember our first date there? Time to celebrate something special." 18 years of memories. Nathan's steel-gray eyes narrowed slightly. Something in the phrasing felt off. Claire had been distant lately, always traveling for work with her consulting firm. Their conversations had become perfunctory, lacking the warmth they once shared. Still, 18 years of marriage had taught him to read between the lines. This wasn't just about anniversary nostalgia. "Jennifer," he called to his assistant through the intercom. "Clear my evening schedule." "Already done, Mr. Pierce. And the board meeting for tomorrow's expansion plan is confirmed. Should I have the financial projections ready?" "No need. James said he'd handle the presentation." Nathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly at mentioning his business partner. Something had been nagging at him about James Harrison's recent behavior, subtle changes in his demeanor, closed-door phone calls, missing documentation from their overseas subsidiaries. On his way out, Nathan stopped at Winston and Gray Florists. "The usual, Mr. Pierce?" Thomas, the elderly owner, reached for the premium roses. Claire's favorites. Some things shouldn't change. Nathan paid, remembering how Claire's eyes had lit up when he'd brought her these same roses on their first date at La Maison Rouge. Back then, he'd been a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams, and she'd been a brilliant economics major who believed in his vision. The restaurant hadn't changed much in 18 years. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over cream-colored walls, and the soft murmur of conversation mixed with gentle piano music. The maitre d' recognized him immediately. Mr. Pierce, welcome back. Your wife is already seated. He hesitated slightly. With another gentleman. Nathan's measured stride didn't falter as he approached the table, but his grip on the roses tightened when he saw James Harrison sitting entirely too close to Claire, their heads bent together in intimate conversation. Claire looked up, her perfectly painted red lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Darling, you're right on time. She wore the diamond necklace Nathan had given her for their 15th anniversary, but somehow it looked different on her now, cold, like armor rather than adornment. James didn't bother standing, just raised his whiskey glass in a mock salute. Nathan, join us for this special occasion. The roses fell forgotten to an empty chair as Nathan noticed the thick manila envelope on the table. Years of high-stakes business negotiations had taught him to maintain composure in any situation. He pulled out a chair, his movements deliberate and controlled. Quite the setup you have here. His voice carried no emotion. I assume that envelope explains why my business partner is dining with my wife? Claire's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. Always so perceptive. That's what I admired about you, darling. She slid the envelope across the crisp white tablecloth. Though apparently not perceptive enough, Nathan opened the envelope, methodically reviewing each document. The waiter approached, but a sharp gesture from Nathan sent him retreating. The only sound was the rustle of papers and the continuing piano melody, now seeming discordant and mocking. Impressive, he finally said, looking up at Claire. How long have you been planning this? Planning? Claire sipped her wine, an expensive Bordeaux that Nathan recognized from their cellar at home. Oh, this isn't just planning. This is years of careful execution. Show him the best part, James. James pulled out another document with flourish. Your recent expansion plan? Every bank rejected your loan applications because they saw some adjusted numbers. His smirk grew wider. You're not just losing the company, Nathan. You're bankrupt. Don't forget to tell him about us, dear, James added, placing his hand over Claire's. Oh yes. Claire's smile turned predatory. James and I have been together for 3 years. He knows how to appreciate a woman with business acumen. All those late nights at the office? We weren't always working on spreadsheets. Nathan sat back, studying them both. Where others might see shock or devastation on his face, there was only cold calculation. Every piece was falling into place. The late-night calls Claire claimed were work emergencies, James's insistence on handling all investor relations, the mysterious withdrawals from company accounts that accounting couldn't explain. 3 years, Nathan repeated softly. Around the time you suggested James should take over our European expansion, he needed full access to our international accounts. Nathan continued, his voice steady. And you, Claire, needed someone on the inside. Tell me, was I always the target? Or did James pick me out for you? Claire's smile faltered slightly at his calm demeanor. Does it matter? Sign the transfer documents, and we can all move on civilly. You've lost, Nathan. Accept it gracefully. Before I sign, Nathan pulled out a pen, his signet ring catching the light. I'm curious about one thing. The Thompson merger last year, that was when you started moving significant shares through your shell companies, wasn't it? James shifted uncomfortably. Just sign the damn papers, Nathan. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're right. Why drag this out? Nathan's pen moved across the paper, his signature as strong and confident as ever. I assume my key card will be deactivated by morning? Sooner, Claire said, gathering the documents. You know, I almost feel bad about this. You did build something impressive. We'll take good care of Pierce Innovations. I'm sure you will. Nathan stood, straightening his tie. Enjoy your dinner. The 82 Bordeaux pairs well with betrayal, I hear. He walked out of La Maison Rouge, past the concerned glances of the staff who'd known him for years. The night air hit his face, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone and sent a single text. It's done. They took the bait. Behind him, through the restaurant's window, Claire and James clinked glasses, celebrating their victory. They didn't notice the distinguished-looking man at the bar who'd been nursing the same drink all evening, or the woman dining alone who'd barely touched her food while typing constantly on her laptop. Nathan's driver, Robert, opened the car door. Home, sir.
No.
Nathan checked his watch. Take me to the office. I have some calls to make. Rough night? Robert had been with Nathan for 15 years and knew his moods well. Just the opposite. Nathan's reflection in the car window showed no sign of a man who just lost everything. Some people are so focused on winning, they forget to check if they're playing the right game. As the car pulled away, Nathan removed his wedding ring, studying it in the passing streetlights before placing it in his pocket. There would be time for sentiment later. Right now, he had work to do. In the restaurant, Claire was already on the phone with their offshore account manager, her voice thick with triumph. Everything's proceeding as planned. Start the transfers tonight. James watched her with admiration and a touch of fear. He'd seen what happened to people who underestimated Claire Pierce, soon to be Claire Harrison. At least, that was the plan they discussed. Somehow, looking at her now, he wondered if he really knew her at all. The waiter brought their dessert, a chocolate souffle feed ordered to celebrate. Compliments of Mr. Pierce, he said quietly. He called it in this morning. Claire's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. This morning? For a moment, doubt crept into her perfect plan. She pushed it aside, reminding herself that Nathan had always been sentimental. That's what made him such an easy target. To us, James raised his glass, pushing away his own flicker of unease. And to Pierce Innovations' bright future. Outside, a light rain began to fall on Seattle streets, washing away the last traces of a marriage built on lies and a partnership founded on betrayal. But in his office high above the city, Nathan Pierce was just beginning his real work. The night was still young, and he had 18 years of trust to repay with interest. The cleaning staff noticed him there well past midnight, his office light a lone beacon in the darkened building. If any of them thought it strange to see the CEO working so late, they didn't mention it. They'd grown used to his dedication over the years. What they didn't see was his phone conversation, conducted in hushed tones near the window. Everything recorded? A woman's voice responded, crystal clear, Mr. Pierce. Both video and audio from multiple angles. Agent Rodriguez says it's better than they hoped for. Good. Nathan watched the city lights below, each one representing a life untouched by the kind of betrayal he'd experienced. Keep monitoring their communications. They'll be moving quickly now. Sir? The woman hesitated. I'm sorry about everything. Don't be, Sarah. Some things need to break before they can be rebuilt properly. He ended the call and turned back to his desk, where the prototype still sat, a reminder of what he'd built and what he would protect. Tomorrow, Claire and James would begin dismantling his life's work, thinking they'd won. They didn't realize they were actually helping him set a trap years in the making. Nathan allowed himself a small smile as he remembered Claire's words. Time to see who really built Pierce Innovations. Indeed it was. The roses lay forgotten on the restaurant chair, their deep red petals a stark contrast to the white linen. Like everything else about this night, they weren't what they appeared to be. Nathan had chosen them not for romance, but as a marker helping the surveillance team identify his table from a distance. In their penthouse apartment, Claire was packing an overnight bag, her movements efficient and purposeful. She picked up a framed photo from their wedding day, studied it for a moment, then dropped it in the trash. The glass cracked, splintering across Nathan's smiling face. Sentimental fool, she murmured. But her hand shook slightly as she zipped the bag. 18 years was a long time to play a role, even for someone as skilled as she was. Part of her had almost grown comfortable in the life she'd built with Nathan. Almost. But comfort didn't build empires. Looking out at the same city view Nathan had observed earlier, she saw not beauty but opportunity. Seattle had been a stepping stone, nothing more. By this time next week, she and James would be restructuring Pierce Innovations, stripping it for parts before moving on to their next target. She didn't know that 20 floors below, in a nondescript apartment filled with surveillance equipment, Sarah Chen was already unraveling the threads of her carefully constructed plan. The former FBI forensic accountant had spent 6 months building a case, and tonight's confession was the final piece she needed. In his private office at Pierce Innovations, Nathan opened his wall safe and removed a thick file, one that even Claire didn't know existed. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and detailed reports tracking his wife's activities over the past year. He'd learned long ago that trust was good, But verification was better. The night stretched on, each player moving their pieces into position for the next day's game. But that would be another act, with its own revelations and consequences. For now, the setup was complete, the trap was set, and the players had shown their hands. Nathan Pierce, the man they thought they destroyed, sat in his office and waited for dawn. He'd built his company from nothing once before. If necessary, he could do it again. But first, he had a debt to settle, not with money, but with justice. The roses wilted in the empty restaurant, their perfume fading into the night air. Like the marriage they represented, they had been nothing but a prop in an elaborate performance. But unlike Claire's calculated betrayal, Nathan's performance was far from over. The real show was about to begin. Sarah Chun sat in her darkened office, surrounded by monitors displaying surveillance feeds from La Maison Rouge. 6 months of meticulous investigation had led to this moment. As Pierce Innovations' head of security, few knew her real background as an FBI forensic accountant, exactly as Nathan had planned. Target is moving. Her earpiece crackled. Mrs. Pierce just sent a secure message to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard, intercepting the encrypted communication. Got it. Start recording all network traffic from their devices. Through the restaurant's cameras, she watched Nathan maintain his composure as Claire and James gloated over their apparent victory. Most men would have crumbled seeing their life's work stolen by their wife and best friend. But Nathan Pierce wasn't most men. 6 months earlier, Ms. Chen, Nathan had said during their first meeting, "I need someone who can follow money trails that don't want to be followed." Sarah remembered studying him across his desk, noting his careful choice of words. "You suspect internal fraud? I suspect something far more elaborate." He'd slid a folder across his desk. "These are discrepancies in our international accounts. Small enough to miss individually, but together, they form a pattern," Sarah finished, scanning the documents. "How long?" 3 years of consistent anomalies. All authorized by my CFO, James Harrison. "And your wife's consulting firm handles your European operations?" Sarah added, connecting the dots. "That's quite a coincidence." Nathan's smile hadn't reached his eyes. "I don't believe in coincidences, Ms. Chan. Neither does the FBI. Present time." The restaurant surveillance feed showed Claire sliding another document across the table. Sarah zoomed in, capturing every page through the high-resolution cameras they'd installed weeks ago. "Transfer papers are being signed," she reported. "Agent Rodriguez, are your teams in position?" Across the restaurant, Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tie, the gesture serving to activate his concealed microphone. "All units standing by. Let them finish their performance." Rodriguez had been tracking Claire's activities across 3 continents. Pierce Innovations wasn't her first target, but if they played this right, it would be her last. "Sir," Sarah spoke into her comm, "Mrs. Pierce is accessing her secure email. Should I intercept?" Nathan's voice came through, calm and measured. "Let it through. Time to see who else is involved in their little scheme." Sarah tracked the email's path as it bounced through servers in Dubai, Singapore, and finally to a private account in Switzerland. The encryption was sophisticated, but she prepared for this. "Breaking through their security now," she murmured. "These people think they're clever, but they're using a predictable pattern." "Got it." The decrypted files painted a devastating picture. Photos, bank statements, corporate documents, evidence of similar takeovers spanning years. But something else caught Sarah's attention. "Sir," she said urgently, "I'm finding references to previous operations. Other companies, other victims, and death certificates. Too many to be coincidental." Nathan's voice remained steady. "Document everything. Agent Rodriguez needs a complete paper trail." In the restaurant, Claire and James were celebrating their supposed triumph. Sarah watched James pour more champagne, his hand lingering too long on Claire's arm. Their confidence was almost pitiable. "The money's moving," Sarah reported, tracking multiple transfers. "They're routing it through 17 different shells companies. No, 20. All registered in the past 5 years." Rodriguez's voice cut in. "Can you trace the endpoints?" "Better." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I can prove Claire Pierce owns all of them. She used the same law firm to set up each company. Sloppy. Through her monitors, Sarah watched Nathan stand to leave. Right on cue, Claire and James began making their own preparations to depart. They had no idea that every cell phone tower between the restaurant and their planned meeting spot was now monitoring their communications. Target vehicles are moving, Rodriguez reported. All units maintain distance. Let's see where our happy couple goes next. Sarah switched to traffic camera feeds, tracking 3 vehicles through Seattle's rain-slicked streets. Claire's Mercedes headed downtown, while James took a more circuitous route toward the harbor. They're splitting up, she noted. Classic misdirection. Stay with Claire, Nathan instructed. James is too cautious to carry anything incriminating. She'll lead us to their documentation. The next hour was a symphony of surveillance. Claire made 3 stops, a private bank, a law office, and finally an unmarked office building near the port. At each location, Sarah's team documented every interaction, every document handled, every call made. Sir, Sarah called up financial records on her screen. I'm seeing a pattern in their previous operations. They don't just steal companies, they destroy them. Systematically drain assets, manipulate stock prices, force bankruptcies. 3 CEOs took their own lives after similar takeovers. Nathan's response was cold. And how many of those were genuine? Sarah dug deeper into Claire's travel records, matching dates for suspicious deaths during her business trips in the past 5 years. All ruled accidents or they took their own lives. All involving wealthy businessmen. Now we know why she was so confident about bankruptcy not bothering me. Nathan's voice held a trace of dark amusement. She expected me to follow her previous victim's example. Rodriguez cut in. We've got movement. Claire's meeting someone at the Riverside office complex. Male, mid-50s, carrying a briefcase. Known associate of several criminal enterprises. That's Marcus Weber. Sarah identified him quickly. Professional money launderer. We've been trying to catch him for years. Through surveillance cameras, they watched Claire hand Weber a thick envelope. His laptop opened, fingers flying across keys as he began transferring funds. He's good, Sarah admitted, tracking the transactions. But I'm better. Her own programs began intercepting and documenting every keystroke, every transfer, every account number. Got you, she whispered as the final pieces fell into place. Years of financial crimes, laid bare in strings of numbers and account transfers. Meanwhile, James had reached his own destination, a private marina where a yacht waited. Sarah's facial recognition software identified 3 known criminals among the crew. Their escape plan, Rodriguez observed. Classic route to international waters, then vanish with the money. Not happening tonight. Nathan's voice came through again. Sarah, what's the total? She calculated quickly. Based on currently tracked transfers, just over $300 million. Multiple companies, multiple victims. And that's just what we can prove so far. Enough for RICO charges, Rodriguez confirmed. We've got them. The night wore on. Claire and James eventually reunited at an upscale hotel, clearly pleased with themselves. Sarah's surveillance captured their conversation in the bar. To the end of Pierce Innovations, Claire raised her glass, smirking. And its foolishly trusting founder. James clinked his glass against hers. You played him perfectly, my dear. Though I almost felt bad for him with those roses. Please, Claire rolled her eyes. He was always too sentimental. That's what made him such an easy mark. Just like the others. Speaking of others, James leaned closer. Weber confirmed the transfers are processing. By morning, Nathan won't even be able to afford a cup of coffee. Sarah switched off the audio, her disgust evident. Sir, we have enough. Multiple confessions, documented transfers, connection to previous victims. Not yet. Nathan's voice was steel. Let them finish their performance. Tomorrow, they'll try to access the company accounts. That's when they'll learn what real bankruptcy feels like. Through the night, Sarah monitored their activities while completing her final report. The evidence was damning. Years of careful manipulation, stolen fortunes, destroyed lives, and a trail of convenient deaths. Sir, she said softly, about Claire's previous husbands. I know. Nathan's response held no emotion. I've known for weeks. That's why we had to let this play out exactly as they planned. Trying to stop them too early would have just sent them underground. Dawn approached. Claire and James, confident in their victory, finally retired to their separate rooms. They'd want to maintain appearances until the takeover was complete. Sarah began compiling the final evidence package for the FBI. Financial records, surveillance footage, intercepted communications, offshore account details, everything needed to ensure that this time, Claire's victims would see justice. It's ready, she reported. Agent Rodriguez can move whenever you give the word. Nathan's response was immediate. Not yet. Let them try to access the company accounts first. I want them to feel what real helplessness is like. Sarah understood. This wasn't just about justice, it was about showing Claire and James exactly who they'd underestimated. Morning would bring Act 3, but that would be another chapter. For now, the trap was set, the evidence gathered, and the predators were about to learn what it felt like to be prey. Through her monitors, Sarah watched the hotel's darkness. In separate rooms, Claire and James slept peacefully, dreaming of their ill-gotten wealth. They had no idea that their empire of lies was about to crumble. Sleep well? Sarah murmured, sending the final evidence package to her secure server. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day. In his office, Nathan reviewed the surveillance footage one last time. Every betrayal, every smirk, every confident boast, all recorded and documented. His expression remained impassive, but his eyes held the cold satisfaction of a man who had outmaneuvered his would-be destroyers. The city lights flickered like stars through his window as he considered tomorrow's events. Claire and James thought they were masters of manipulation, experts at destroying lives for profit. They were about to learn that some people don't break when betrayed, they get even. Dawn was approaching, bringing with it the final act of this elaborate performance. But that would be another story, for another time. For now, the pieces were in place, the evidence secured, and justice waited in the wings. The night's rain had stopped, leaving Seattle's streets gleaming like black glass. In her office, Sarah Chin finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The monitors continued their silent vigilance, recording every movement, every transaction, every piece of evidence that would ensure Claire and James would never destroy another life. 1 week after the restaurant meeting, dawn broke over Seattle's private airfield. Claire Pierce checked her Cartier watch, a gift Nathan had given her for their 15th anniversary. In 30 minutes, her private jet would take off for Dubai, leaving behind the ashes of Pierce Innovations. Final checks complete, Mrs. Pierce, the pilot reported. We're cleared for takeoff. Claire nodded, her designer heels clicking across the tarmac. Everything had gone perfectly. The company accounts were drained, assets transferred, and Nathan. Well, Nathan would soon be yesterday's news. Her phone buzzed. James. Minor delay accessing the last account.
Systems acting strange.
Claire frowned. James wasn't supposed to access anything until she was safely out of U.S. airspace. Wait for my signal, she texted back. The first sign something was wrong came when she noticed 2 black SUVs pulling onto the tarmac. Then another pair appeared, blocking the runway. Mrs. Pierce? Agent Rodriguez stepped out, badge glinting in the morning sun. I'm afraid your flight's been canceled. Claire's hand moved toward her purse, but a female agent was already there, removing the gun Claire thought no one knew about. Claire Pierce, Rodriguez continued, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Across town, James Harrison stared at his computer screen in disbelief. Every account was locked, not just frozen, completely inaccessible. His override codes, backdoors, everything, useless. Going somewhere? Sarah Chin's voice made him spin around. FBI agents filed into his office. This is ridiculous, James blustered. I'm the CFO of Pierce Innovations. I have every right to commit fraud. Sarah held up a tablet displaying his account transfers. To assist in multiple murders? Interesting interpretation of fiduciary duty. As agents led him out, James caught sight of Nathan standing in the doorway. You knew, James realized. How long? Long enough. Nathan's voice was cold. By the way, those adjusted numbers you showed the banks? They've been very interested in the real ones. The arrests made international headlines within hours. Black Widow CEO caught in international sting. Corporate killing spree ends. Power couple faces lie. Pierce Innovations founder exposes murderous fraud scheme. At FBI headquarters, Claire sat in interrogation, her perfect composure finally cracking as Rodriguez laid out photograph after photograph. Martin Weber, your first husband, Rodriguez placed the photo. Car accident, 2015. Brake lines mysteriously failed. Claire's manicured nail tapped the table. Tragic accident. Alexander Chun, husband number 2. 2017. Apparent self-immolation except, you have nothing, Claire snapped, but her voice wavered. We have everything. Rodriguez spread out more photos. Businessmen, all dead. All connected to Claire's business trips. Your other victims' families are very interested in reopening these investigations. The death penalty is still active in several of these jurisdictions. Claire's face went ash white. 2 rooms over, James was crumbling even faster. It was all her idea, he babbled. Claire approached me 3 years ago. Said she had a system, foolproof. Target successful companies, use inside information to acquire control, drain the assets. And the deaths? Sarah Chun asked quietly. I didn't know at first. James wiped his forehead. I thought they were just financial takeovers. But then I saw patterns. Claire's business trips always seemed to coincide with accidents. How many others? At least 12 companies. But the murders? God, I don't even know the full count. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah's team had tracked every transaction, every shell company, every offshore account. The total stolen, over $300 million. The human cost, immeasurable. 3 months later, Claire paced her prison cell, her Prada suits replaced by orange coveralls. Her carefully constructed world had shattered. Other inmates whispered about the Black Widow, the woman who killed husbands for profit. The guard found her on a Tuesday morning, unresponsive. The inquiry revealed a poison capsule, somehow smuggled in. Even in death, Claire demanded control. James received 30 years. No poison pills for him, just decades to reflect on choosing the wrong partner in crime. Nathan rebuilt Pierce Innovations, emerging stronger from the crucible of betrayal. The company's new transparency measures became industry standard. Sarah Chun, promoted to COO, helped implement systems protecting other firms from similar schemes. Occasionally, Nathan visited James in prison. Not for closure. Nathan had never needed that. He went to remind James that while some people built things of value, others only knew how to destroy. Claire's death became a cautionary tale in business schools worldwide. Students studied how ambition unchecked by ethics inevitably self-destructed. Her detailed journals, discovered after her death, revealed a sociopath's calculating mind. She'd started small in college, manipulating wealthy students for profit. Each success fed her hunger for more. The FBI created a specialized task force, using lessons from the Pierce case to identify similar long-term corporate infiltration schemes. Agent Rodriguez led the unit, with Sarah Chen consulting on financial forensics. Pierce Innovations' medical devices went on to save thousands of lives. Nathan found poetry in that how an attempt to destroy his life's work had instead made it stronger. The trick, he told young entrepreneurs at a conference, isn't just watching your business partners. It's watching their partners. Trust, but verify. Then verify again. In the end, Claire's elaborate scheme accomplished something she never intended. It created a template for protecting honest businesses from predators like herself. The roses Nathan had brought to La Maison Rouge that night were pressed between the pages of the FBI's case file. A reminder that appearances deceive, and that justice, like revenge, was best served cold. Epilogue. Years later, a reporter asked Nathan if he regretted not catching Claire sooner, before other victims suffered. Regret is useless, he replied. I saw a threat to everything I'd built. I eliminated it. Business is simple that way. The reporter noted he didn't sound like a man who'd lost his wife. I lost nothing, Nathan corrected. I removed a cancer before it could destroy what I spent my life building. The only one who lost was Claire. She just didn't know it until the end. Sarah Chun kept the surveillance recordings from that final night at La Maison Rouge. Sometimes, training new security teams, she played Claire's confident pronunciation of doom, followed by the moment she realized her own hubris had destroyed her. James Harrison served his time in solitude, abandoned by his co-conspirator's death. The only visitor he received was Nathan, whose yearly appearances served as a reminder. Some debts could never be repaid. Pierce Innovations' stock price tripled within a year of Claire's arrest. The company's new corporate governance model, designed by Sarah Chun, became known as the Pierce Protocol, a systematic defense against long-term corporate infiltration. Nathan never remarried. His company became his legacy, its life-saving innovations his answer to Claire's dedication to destruction. He kept no photos of her, no mementos of their 18 years together. But he did keep one thing: the knowledge that he'd turned her own weapon patience against her. The final page of the FBI file contained a note from Claire, written the night before her death. Nathan didn't win because he was smarter. He won because he was willing to wait longer for revenge than I was willing to wait for victory. She was wrong, of course. Nathan hadn't waited for revenge. He'd waited for justice. And justice, unlike Claire, had infinite patience. Epilogue: a decade of consequences. 10 years had passed since the fall of Claire Pierce and James Harrison. Their stories still echoed through corporate boardrooms and law enforcement training sessions, a cautionary tale of hubris and its inevitable price. Marcus Rodriguez, now deputy director of the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division, kept a framed news article on his office wall. Black Widow CEO's empire of deception crumbles. It served as a reminder that the most dangerous predators often wore designer suits and carried platinum cards. The Pierce case changed everything, he explained to new recruits. It wasn't just about corporate fraud anymore. It showed us how patient psychopaths could weaponize legitimate business practices. The task force he created, nicknamed Operation Phoenix, after Pierce Innovations' rise from the ashes, had prevented 17 similar schemes in the past decade. Every potential Claire Pierce was now flagged by an algorithm Sarah Chun had developed, tracking patterns of corporate infiltration and suspicious deaths. James Harrison's life had taken a different trajectory. Prison had not been kind to the former CFO. His initial bravado crumbled within months, replaced by a haunted look that deepened with each passing year. Other inmates, many of whom had lost family savings to corporate fraudsters, ensured his stay was especially uncomfortable. During Nathan's annual visits, James had aged decades. His perfectly coiffed hair had gone gray, his confident smirk replaced by nervous twitches. He'd tried writing a memoir, seeking profit from his crimes, but Nathan's legal team had secured an injunction. Every cent James might ever earn would go to his victims' families. You know what the worst part is? James had asked during Nathan's last visit. She never cared about me either. I found letters in her private files she was already planning to frame me for everything. I would have been just another self-immolation in her body count. Nathan had simply watched him through the glass, neither offering comfort nor showing satisfaction. James had chosen his path, chosen to help destroy lives for profit. His regrets meant nothing. Claire's legacy proved even darker. Post-mortem psychological analysis of her journals revealed a methodical sociopath who had started manipulating and destroying lives in high school. Her college years included 3 suspicious deaths of wealthy students who'd accidentally drowned after changing their wills in her favor. The poison pill that ended her life had been her final manipulation. Investigation revealed she'd arranged its delivery through a complex network of compromised prison staff and former associates. Even her self-immolation was designed to deny others the satisfaction of justice. But her death brought forward scores of witnesses who'd feared her while she lived. The full scope of her operations emerged: 23 companies destroyed, 18 deaths ruled accidents or self-immolations, and hundreds of millions in stolen assets hidden in accounts across the globe. She was a statistical anomaly, Sarah Chun explained at a cybersecurity conference. Most corporate criminals want profit. Claire wanted destruction. The money was just her scorecard. Sarah had transformed Pierce Innovations' security division into a global consultancy. The Pierce Protocol, her corporate defense system, had become the gold standard for protecting companies against long-term infiltration. She'd recently turned down a presidential appointment to remain at Pierce Innovations, telling reporters, Some debts can only be repaid by preventing history from repeating. Pierce Innovations itself had emerged stronger, its medical devices saving lives in hospitals worldwide. The company's transparency measures attracted ethical investors and talented employees who valued integrity over quick profits. Nathan had transformed his personal tragedy into a force for positive change, though those who knew him well recognized that transformation was fueled by cold calculation rather than altruism. The company's headquarters now included a secure room known as the Archive. Inside, Sarah maintained records of every corporate infiltration scheme they'd helped expose. Claire and James occupied the first display, their story serving as training material for corporate security teams. The fascinating thing, Sarah told her students, wasn't just the complexity of their scheme. It was how simple its prevention could have been. One person asking the right questions at the right time could have stopped them years earlier. Nathan Pierce's own evolution was perhaps the most intriguing. He'd emerged from betrayal not bitter, but more sharply focused. His annual prison visits to James weren't about closure, they were reminders to others that betrayal carried consequences. When asked about Claire, his responses were clinical, analytical. She thought she was special, he'd tell business students. She didn't realize that patient, methodical destruction could be met with patient, methodical justice. The roses from that final dinner at La Maison Rouge had been preserved by the FBI's forensics lab. They sat in a clear case in Rodriguez's office, next to Claire's self-immolation note and James's confession. Together, they told a story of trust weaponized and justice served cold. Perhaps the most lasting impact was on corporate culture itself. The Pierce effect became business terminology for the implementation of systematic protections against trust-based infiltration. Companies worldwide adopted variations of Sarah's security protocols, creating interlocking systems of verification that made long-term corporate deception increasingly difficult. The victims' families had eventually received justice, though not all found peace. Nathan had established a foundation providing support for families affected by corporate fraud, funded by recovered assets from Claire's hidden accounts. The foundation specialized in detecting signs of corporate psychopathy before it claimed lives. La Maison Rouge itself had changed hands, the new owners unaware their private dining room had hosted the beginning of Claire's end. But some of the old staff remembered, and they'd point out the table to federal agents who occasionally visited, studying the stage where justice began its patient work. James Harrison's 30-year sentence continued grinding away. He tried appealing, claiming he'd been manipulated by Claire, but the evidence Sarah had gathered proved his willing participation. His prison counselor noted he still woke screaming some nights, haunted by the faces of executives whose deaths he'd helped orchestrate. Claire's other victims emerged from shadows cast by her crimes. Support groups formed, sharing stories of manipulation and near destruction. Their testimonies helped strengthen corporate security laws, closing loopholes Claire had exploited. Her methods became red flags, studied by forensic accountants and corporate security experts. Nathan had indeed never remarried, but not from lingering attachment. Marriage is a partnership, he'd explained to a journalist. I prefer partnerships with clear performance metrics and exit clauses. His focus remained on building something lasting, something that could withstand any attempt at infiltration or destruction. Pierce Innovations' latest medical breakthrough, a neural implant helping paralyzed patients walk again, stood as testament to what could be built from the ashes of betrayal. The company's research division, now the largest in the industry, maintained one rule above all others. Trust must be earned daily, verified hourly, and never taken for granted. Sarah Chin's security algorithms continued evolving, learning from each attempt at corporate infiltration they detected. She'd created an AI system nicknamed Claire, not from sentiment, but as a reminder that the most dangerous predators could be identified by their patterns. The FBI task force expanded globally, sharing data with international agencies tracking similar schemes. They prevented billions in corporate theft, saved countless lives from destruction, and most importantly, taught businesses to recognize the warning signs of methodical infiltration. Rodriguez, approaching retirement, had trained a new generation of agents in what he called Pierce awareness, the understanding that corporate crimes weren't just about money, but about power and destruction. His team had developed psychological profiles helping identify potential Claires before they could fully implement their schemes. James Harrison's prison cell contained one personal item, a newspaper clipping about Pierce Innovation's success, not from pride in what he'd helped build, but as a reminder of what he'd tried to destroy. His prison counselor noted it represented progress from denying his crimes to acknowledging their impact. The roses in Rodriguez's office dried but never crumbled, preserved in their clear case like a museum piece. They remained as Claire remained in corporate memory, a beautiful warning of trust misplaced and justice served. Their thorns, still sharp after a decade, reminded visitors that beauty often concealed danger. Nathan Pierce's office overlooked a changed Seattle skyline. Pierce Innovation's new headquarters dominated the view, its transparent glass design a physical manifestation of the company's commitment to visibility and accountability. From his desk, he could see the harbor where Claire had planned her escape, now home to a Pierce Innovations research center. The simple truth, he told corporate security directors, is that trust is a weapon. In the right hands, it builds empires. In the wrong hands, it destroys them. The key isn't avoiding trust, it's verifying it. Continuously, methodically, patiently. 10 years after Claire's fall, her story had become more than a cautionary tale. It was a blueprint for protection, a lesson in patience, and a reminder that justice, like vengeance, was best served cold. The price of trust had been paid in full.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
We had been married for 15 years, but things had become monotonous, and we grew apart. We were living under the same roof, but in separate worlds. Different rooms, no longer partners, confidants, or lovers. She started leaving hints, and I finally took notice. I did some digging, and it turned out she had an affair, at least an emotional one. She had been complaining to me, but I had stopped listening to her long ago, dismissing her complaints and mockeries. But when I uncovered the truth, I stopped just hearing her. I really listened. She was unhappy with our marriage, and she had fallen out of love with me. I knew if I tried to convince her that she was wrong and that we could fix our marriage, she'd only distance herself even more. I could see it in her eyes. The gap between us was growing wider. So, I decided to let go of the idea of fixing things. I sat there, drinking my beer, replaying our last argument over and over in my mind, trying to figure out how to win her back. But every time I tried harder to get her back, she drifted further away. I spent late nights in the guest room, letting my wife sleep in our large family bed while I nursed my wounds. One night, something changed. As I reflected on our relationship, I had a sudden realization. Why was I arguing with her about her feelings? What she felt was real to her, and I had been dismissing it. I realized how foolish I had been, trying to tell her that her feelings weren't valid. From that moment on, I stopped arguing with her. But what about me? As I sat there in the dark, it hit me. I wasn't happy either. I wasn't in love with her anymore. I was in love with the idea of our marriage and the life we used to have, but that wasn't our reality anymore. This epiphany shook me, and I knew I had to make a change. I spent time reflecting, and eventually, I came up with a plan. It didn't matter if it worked or not. I knew that what we were doing wasn't working, and I couldn't keep doing the same thing expecting different results. So, I smiled, tossed the empty beer bottles into the trash, and made the decision to sleep in the guest room. This was part of the plan. But just as I was about to settle in, my wife, Becky, opened the door and flicked on the light, interrupting my peace. "Why are you sleeping in the guest room?" Becky asked as she walked into the room. I squinted against the bright light, my eyes adjusting. "I stayed up late and didn't want to disturb you," I replied. She looked at me for a moment before heading to the kitchen to make herself coffee. I wasn't a coffee drinker. Thankfully, I could wake up alert and ready to go. After jumping into the shower, I prepared for the conversation ahead, feeling oddly light on my feet. When I walked into the living room, Becky was sitting across from me, visibly agitated, her fists clenched. I sat down on the couch in my usual spot, watching her closely. "Timothy," she began, her voice shaky, "this isn't working. I feel disappointed, lost, and I don't think I love you anymore." I sat still, letting her words hang in the air. She took a deep breath and continued, "I know we've been together a long time, but I think we need to get a divorce." The word divorce lingered, and I couldn't help but smile as she nervously waited for my reaction. "That sounds good, dear," I said casually. She blinked in disbelief. "Timothy, Did you hear me? I nodded. Yes, I heard you. You feel it's not working, you don't love me, and you want a divorce. I agree. She seemed bewildered, her confusion evident as she searched my face for a reaction. Do you understand now? She asked. I stood up, walked over to her, and knelt down in front of her. Becky, I can't change how you feel. If you don't love me, how can I argue with that? Can I tell you that you're wrong about your feelings? No. If you feel you can't live with me anymore, then how can I argue with that either? Becky looked at me as if I had lost my mind. But in that moment, I saw the recognition in her eyes, an acknowledgement that I understood what she was feeling, and she appreciated it. Wait, she said, her voice shaking. You said you didn't love me? I nodded. There were times just like for you. She looked taken aback, as if this wasn't the scene she had imagined playing out. Her emotions were reflected in her expression, and I couldn't help but notice the shift. Anything else? I asked. I need to leave tonight, so I'd like to settle this now, if you don't mind. Are you leaving right now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I stood up, putting on my jacket. Yes, I'm leaving. I think I'll hit a few bars. Maybe I'll start looking for someone else instead of you. I waved goodbye to her and left, leaving her sitting in the chair, stunned and speechless. I stopped at the nearest bar, ordered a bourbon, and took a seat at a table away from the crowd. As I sipped my drink, I took out my phone and called Nancy, a coworker who was known as the office gossip. I played the part of the abandoned husband, telling her about the conversation I'd had with Becky, especially her shocking request for a divorce. I didn't tell her the full truth, of course. I was at the bar, drowning my sorrows in whiskey, and I might not show up for work the next day. I could hear the gears turning in Nancy's head. She and I had flirted a bit at work, and she was single. Before long, she invited herself out to join me, claiming she wanted to keep me company during this emotional time. I agreed and met her at a bar I knew my wife and her friends often visited. Was I concerned that someone might see me? No. My marriage was over, and neither Becky nor I had love left for each other. Nancy showed up quickly, dressed to impress, maybe hoping to get to me before anyone else could. That's what I like to believe, at least. But when she saw me, she was surprised to find my body language and mood didn't match the gravity of the news I'd shared with her. My smile didn't help either. Timothy, what's happening? She asked, sitting beside me, confused. I raised my hand and pointed to my ring finger, which was now bare. She wants a divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight it? I waved down the waiter and ordered another drink. Nancy ordered her usual Cosmo as she sat down. Timothy, over the phone, you seemed more upset, she said. I took a deep breath. We've been unhappy for a while, I replied. I finally realized that maybe I don't love her like I used to. She wants this divorce, so I'm not going to fight it. If she wants to leave, fine. I'm not going to lie around feeling forgotten and unloved. Nancy took a big sip of her drink and set it down, watching me. I could tell my attitude was having an effect on her, though I wasn't sure if it was confusion or something else. Maybe we should dance? I said without waiting for her to answer, grabbing her hand and leading her to the dance floor. She looked up at me. Timothy, what are you planning to do? I pulled her closer, enjoying the closeness. I'm going to give her everything she thinks she wants. I'm going to do whatever I want right now. And right now, I want to dance with you. In fact, I've wanted to dance with you for a long time. She smiled, looking into my eyes. If you're trying to get back at her. I raised an eyebrow. Maybe, I replied, as she pressed her body against mine, comfortable and warm. I'm okay with that, she said with a sigh, and we lost track of time. It felt good not to worry about calling home to tell Becky when I'd be back. Nancy was fun, intelligent, and we flirted all evening. She was completely mine, and she knew it. I knew it, but I didn't take her home with me. It was enough to know that someone wanted me. Becky had bruised my ego, but Nancy had built it back up. In fact, I'd say Nancy was more attractive than Becky. We kissed in the parking lot by her car. I opened the door for her and smiled. See you tomorrow at work. She nodded, understanding that I wasn't looking for anything serious right now. I made it clear that I just needed some fun, and that's all I was offering. Nancy understood that. By the end of tomorrow, I was sure all the women in the office would know about it. I'd like to tell you that I'm a calm man, but the truth is, I was already looking forward to rubbing this in Becky's face a little. When I walked in the door, Becky was already in bed. As soon as she heard me come in, she jumped up to meet me. Where have you been? She snapped. I hung up my coat in the closet and started undressing. I went out, I said. I told you I was leaving. Why should you care? Timothy, I was worried you might do something bad to yourself. I smiled. Becky, I know how you feel. I'm fine. You want a divorce? I'll gladly give you one. I'm not going to force you to live with someone you don't love anymore. I grabbed my pillow and my clothes for the next morning, heading for the guest room. Timothy, Becky called out, her voice hesitant. I stopped, shifting my things to the other hand. What? I asked. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't understand. You don't have to sleep in another bed. I paused, deliberately not making it easy for her. Are you suggesting that I move out of our bedroom? Becky gasped, wiping away a tear. No, I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share the bed with me, if you want to. If you don't want to, I guess I could move to another room. Her voice was shaky, unsure. She seemed nervous about the idea of me actually leaving the bedroom. I could see the fear in her face, unsure of what I might do next. I decided to spare her the agony. Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you, if it's not too much trouble. Her face brightened. Oh yes, that would be wonderful. I mean, it's no problem for me. Then it's settled, I said, tossing my pillow back onto the bed. She opened her mouth, probably to talk, but I was too tired. Let's just go to bed, I told her. By the following evening, for women at work had shown interest in me. One of my friends even gave me his sister's number. She was a widow, struggling to find someone. I set up dates for the coming week with all 4 women, including another one with Nancy. I intentionally kept this evening free because I needed to talk with Becky and sort things out. It was time to address the situation. When I got home, Becky was waiting for me. Carol saw you last night at the bar, she said. She said you were with a woman. Who was that? What were you doing together? She said you two looked really comfortable. I could have exploded. I could have yelled at her, accused her of neglecting me, of distancing herself from me. But I didn't. I smiled and told her I'd answer her questions after I changed. She tried to push, but I ignored her and went to change into something more comfortable. When I came back downstairs, Becky was staring at me, her eyes filled with anger and tears. She was ready for a fight. It was Nancy from work, I said, not denying it. She probably expected me to make excuses, but I didn't. What were you doing together? She asked, her voice full of accusation. We were on a date, I replied calmly. On a date? She shrieked, and I nodded. Yes. You want a divorce, right? You told me you don't love me. So why shouldn't I look for love elsewhere? You don't love me anymore, so what reason do I have to stay here? She slumped into her chair, defeated. But what will people say? She asked, her voice quieter now. Carol's already gossiping about you dating some woman. I stood up, pacing. Don't you dare call Nancy a woman like that, I said. She's a lady, and I treated her as such. Last night, she went on a date with a married man. But I guess that's what you call a promiscuous woman. So what would you call a married woman who knowingly dates other men without her husband's knowledge? Becky was silent, her face a mix of panic and realization. What does that have to do with me? She exploded. I remained calm, my silence stretching between us. She finally saw it in my face. How much do you know? She asked, her voice trembling. Enough, I said sharply. Whether you slept with them or not, I really don't care anymore. This marriage was over the moment you checked out. I'm done. I'm moving on. I'm taking care of myself because I don't get any support from my wife at home. I went into the kitchen and made myself dinner. When I finished, I found Becky watching me. She hesitated for a moment before saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, I said, putting away the dishes. I've got plans for the rest of the week. Don't expect me home early. And if you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't respond. Later, I went to bed in the guest room, leaving Becky to deal with her restless night. The next day, I met Kathy. She was a sweet, 35-year-old blonde, divorced with 2 kids. We had coffee and then did something silly, played laser tag, just the 2 of us against a team of 10 teenagers. They kept annihilating us, but we laughed, sitting and chatting between games. After one round, we both died in the game and lay side by side. I pulled her towards me and kissed her. She kissed me back, and after a nice dinner, I walked her back to her house. We kissed again before parting ways, and she made me promise to ask her out again soon. When I got home, I expected another confrontation with Becky, but when I walked in, she seemed different, subdued. Hello, she said quietly. I smiled and greeted her as I undressed after my date. You seem like you had a good time, she observed, trying to hide her emotions. I did, thanks for noticing, I replied. How was your evening? She asked. We talked for the first time in months, really listened to each other. She finally confessed, I've never slept with anyone else. I've kissed a few men, and I shared my feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more, but I wasn't ready. I looked at her and said, Becky, I'm sure we both share blame in this. Even though you didn't sleep with anyone, you still betrayed me. We were a team, and you checked out long ago. I respect that you didn't actually sleep with someone before asking for a divorce, but you've still hurt me. I should have listened to your feelings instead of arguing with them. She nodded, her face a mixture of regret and acceptance. We sat in silence for a while, both processing everything. Timothy, I'm feeling so confused right now. I'm not sure if I want a divorce. I smiled and replied, Let me know when you figure it out. I'm not kicking you out, and I'm not planning to leave anytime soon. I was already heading to the guest bedroom when she asked, Are you still going to see Nancy? Yes, I answered. I'm seeing her, and others too. Do what you need to do, figure it out. I need to do what's best for me. If we get a divorce, well, then it wasn't meant to be. I entered the guest bedroom, but she followed me, stopping in the doorway. Timothy, she said. I turned to see her standing there as I took off my shirt. Come back to bed, please, she begged. I hesitated. Do you think that's wise? Tears streamed down her face. I don't know. I just want you right now. I reached out to her, and she threw herself into my arms, sobbing. She was confused and didn't know how to feel. I carried her back to our bed, holding her as we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. We often discussed the latest TV shows and fandom topics. We went to a bar with live music that evening, which she was excited about, but none of her friends or dates were interested in joining her. So, I took her with me. We had fun, but there was no romantic chemistry between us, just a solid friendship, which was enough for both of us. I got home early and parked in the driveway, only to see a car there. A brief pang of jealousy flared up, but I quickly calmed myself, reminding myself that whatever happens, happens. There's no point in worrying, right? I learned this technique from my psychiatrist during treatment for my fear of flying. Instead of thinking, oh God, I'm about to get on a plane, he helped me reframe it to, oh God, I'm about to get on a plane, I can't wait. It took some practice, but it generally worked in the short term. I repeated my mantra and opened the door, finding Becky sitting with Carol, one of her friends. Timothy, I didn't expect you back so soon, Becky said. Carol, I nodded at them. Carol gave me a cold stare but didn't speak. Work finished early, so here I am, I said. Do you need some privacy? Becky and Carol exchanged glances, and Carol stood up. I should get going. Becky, I'll talk to you soon. Becky walked Carol to the door, and when she returned, she said, Sorry for intruding. I didn't mean to interrupt your evening. I shrugged. Don't be silly, Timothy. This is your home too. I paused, considering her words. When was the last time either of us called this place our home? Have you eaten? She asked. I poked at the leftovers from what she and Carol had apparently shared. How are you? I asked. She sat down. I'm okay, I think. I invited Carol over to talk, but she only confused me more. How so? I asked. She wanted me to kick you out, change the locks, and divorce you, Becky said. Well, my key still works, so I guess you didn't have time to call the locksmith, I replied. She laughed softly. Don't be silly. I had to explain to her that I was the one who asked for the divorce after I told you that. What rights do I have over you? I left you, right? She looked intently at me, that last part more of a question, searching for an answer. I wanted to jump up and reassure her, to tell her that I still belonged to her, but I didn't. I stayed silent. In the past, my reassurances would have pushed her away, but maybe this more non-committal approach would have a different effect. Changing the subject, I blurted out, I'm afraid I have some bad news. My date for tomorrow night canceled, so now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Maybe you'd like to go with me instead of another girl? Her face brightened. Oh, Timothy, I would love to. I mean, if you want. I shrugged. Well, I could give these tickets to someone at work. No, she said decisively, but then added, I mean, I'd be happy to go with you. She blushed and nodded. Are you sure? I asked. Yes, she whispered. I smiled. This could be fun. I informed Heather about the change in plans, and though she was disappointed, she understood. Such is life in the dating game. Becky was dressed and ready when I picked her up after work. She looked amazing, clearly dressed to impress. I couldn't help but think she might have chosen that outfit to catch my attention. I didn't know much about the band. Heather had recommended the concert, so I'd bought the tickets. They were good, loud but enjoyable. I wasn't surprised when we ran into Heather. I could see that Becky was caught off guard by how great Heather looked, and she quickly realized that Heather was supposed to be my date tonight. I apologized to Heather, introducing her to Becky. Heather, this is Becky. Becky, Heather, I said. Heather was supposed to be my date tonight, but something came up. Usually, when I introduced Becky, I referred to her as my wife, but this time, I decided not to. Becky noticed right away. "Nice to meet you, Heather," Becky said, looking her directly in the eyes. Something passed between the two women. Heather, being smart, quickly apologized and said she'd see me at work the next day. Becky, on the other hand, was seething. She grabbed my hand and asked, "Timothy, where's your wedding ring?" I shrugged. "At home. I took it off after you asked for a divorce. I don't need it anymore." Becky was at a loss for words. "Timothy, we aren't divorced yet." I smiled, focusing on the music. Several times, I went to the bar to refill our drinks. Each time, Becky kept a close watch on me. Every time I was at the bar, some woman would approach, and I'd chat with them. One even made me laugh and slipped me her number. Becky noticed but didn't say anything. I'm not usually the type to flirt, but after Becky asked for the divorce, I allowed myself to be more free. I discovered I had a rather blunt knack for flirting, and without the restraint I once had, I didn't need to hold back anymore. I'm not the handsomest guy around, but I've always had a good sense of humor, and it seemed that women appreciated it. For the first time in a while, I could feel Becky watching me, maybe even remembering how my humor and charm once captivated her heart. She stayed quiet the whole way home, and so did I. Once we were home and getting ready for bed, Becky asked again, "Timothy, where's your wedding ring?" I pointed to the sock drawer in the dresser. She walked over, opened it, and pulled out the gold ring. She stared at it for a moment, then looked at me, her eyes welling with tears. "It's yours now," I told her. "I think you should throw it away or sell it." She hesitated. "What should I do with it?" she asked quietly. "Do whatever you want," I replied. That ring was a symbol of our love, our marriage. At one point, it was a shield, a warning that I was unavailable to others. I doubt most people even understand the meaning behind it. For me, this ring kept other women away. I hoped your ring would do the same for you, but ever since you chose not to live with me anymore, I no longer need it to protect me. It just reminds me of what used to be. I looked her straight in the eyes until she met my gaze. "When the time comes, you'll decide what to do with it." I stepped closer to her and closed her fingers around the gold band. She held onto it quietly, accepting the responsibility. "Thank you for the evening," she called out to me as I was drifting off to sleep. "I really enjoyed the concert and spending time with you." "Anytime," I muttered, before slipping back into sleep. The next morning, breakfast was ready. Becky had made eggs and bacon, and I appreciated her effort. But as I looked at her, I noticed she hadn't taken off her wedding and engagement rings. I also noticed Becky fidgeting with her wedding and engagement rings as we ate breakfast together that morning. Later, at work, Carol called me. "Carol, I'm surprised to hear from you. What can I do for you?" "Lunch today at 12:30 at Bohemia," she said, before hanging up. I stared at the phone, unsure of what to expect. I didn't know Carol very well. She was one of Becky's friends from work, someone I didn't have much interaction with. Becky had always seemed to bond with her, but Carol had never been particularly friendly toward me. When I walked into the bar where I'd first met Nancy, I saw Carol sitting at a table with a white linen tablecloth. She waved at me, but her expression was tense and stern, signaling that this conversation would likely not be pleasant. As soon as I sat down and our orders were taken, Carol gave me a hard glare. "What the hell are you doing? Becky is in agony, and you're dating other women right in front of her?" For the first time in a while, I felt my face flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. I quickly bit my tongue, realizing that anything I said or did here would probably get reported back to Becky. I took a moment to regain control of my emotions before responding. "Carol, how much do you really know about what's going on with Becky?" I asked. "I know her husband is acting like a complete idiot," she growled. I glanced around, aware of the people watching us. "Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly, and I'll answer yours." "I have nothing to hide." Carol hesitated, then relaxed as the waiter brought our food. I sat back, waiting for her to continue. Becky's situation wasn't lost on Carol. "Becky's confused," Carol admitted. "So confused that she feels she needs to see other men to sort out her thoughts." She blushed, sipping her water. "Becky's having a weak moment, Timothy," she added. "Really?" I asked, my voice thick with sarcasm. "So now I'm the idiot?" "We've been trying to help her figure things out," Carol said. I leaned in, feeling the anger bubble up. "This is where I take exception, Carol. Why is it you and your friends feel the need to help her sort out her marriage?" Carol went silent. "What business is it of yours?" I asked. "Becky is my friend," she said quietly. "So what?" I snapped. Shouldn't I be her best friend, her partner, her life companion? If she had problems, shouldn't she have come to me first? Instead, she goes to you, her friends, who decide it's a good idea to take her places where she can sort out her feelings with other men. Men who don't seem to care they're kissing another man's wife. Carol turned pale. She seemed to lose her appetite completely. I could feel my anger rising. Carol was just another foolish friend who felt the need to meddle in something she didn't understand. Let me ask you something, Carol, I said. Are you married? She shook her head. Have you ever been married? Another shake of her head. Do you have a degree in counseling? She was silent. Then what gives you the right to give advice about marriage? You've never been married. So how would you know what it's like? Carol gasped, taken aback. You think you can meddle in someone else's marriage? I asked. What makes you think you're qualified? I'm her friend, she muttered. From where I'm sitting, you don't know anything about me. How many times have you ever talked to me? Once or twice. I've been married to Becky for 15 years, but when have you ever made the effort to get to know me, to understand the man who's been her partner for all that time? You talk about helping her, but what the hell do you know about me other than what Becky's told you from her perspective? I could tell that Carol was on the verge of tears. I had made my point, and now I needed to get the message through to Becky via Carol. Carol, I said, my voice steady, Becky told me how she feels. She wants a divorce. She said, and I quote, I don't love you anymore. So, tell me, how am I supposed to respond to that? What argument can I make to convince her otherwise? She wants the divorce, and why should I be unhappy, hoping she'll change her mind? I finished my drink and noticed I hadn't eaten much of my food. I stood up, giving Carol one last look. I've realized that other women see something in me that Becky no longer does. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I'm not going to put my life on hold just because my partner is confused and no longer wants me. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about that is her business. I'm no longer trying to convince her or tell her how she should feel. I've accepted that. With those final words, I left before Carol could say anything more. I knew as soon as I walked out, she'd be on the phone with Becky. As I walked away, I had some thinking to do. That evening, I was meeting Sandra. Things went very well with Sandra. She was different from the others. She was a younger, very beautiful black woman, incredibly attractive. When she first joined our company, we were formal and polite. But a few months in, there was a moment when I was telling a rather spicy joke to some guys, and as I reached the punchline, Sandra walked into the room behind me. The men around me noticed her and held their breath. I turned to see her shocked expression and flashed her a mischievous smile. Admit it, that's really funny, I said. She stood there for a moment, her face saying, I can't believe this white guy just said that to me, before she burst out laughing along with me. From then on, she was one of the guys. By the end of our date, however, she was all woman. Sandra allowed me to go further than I had with other women, but when the moment came, I was the one to decline her offer to stay the night. As much as I wanted to, there were still issues with Becky that I needed to resolve before I could sleep with someone else. That night, as I settled into bed, Becky spoke up. Timothy? Yes? I answered, turning to face her. Please take a shower. Her voice was trembling. Why? It's dark, I said, confused. The light came on, and I saw her face, flushed and moist from crying. She couldn't meet my eyes. Please, Timothy. If you don't take a shower, I'm going to have to ask you to sleep in the guest room. I was stunned. What's happening? I can't stand the smell of her on you, she said, turning away from me. You smell like her. It hit me then that she meant Sandra. I felt horrible. I hadn't even realized. I'm sorry, I whispered, feeling the weight of her pain. If you want me to go to the guest room, I can. No, she sobbed. I want you to come back to our bed, but only after you take a shower. I can't stand her scent on you. It's bad enough knowing you're seeing other women. I can pretend you're just out with the guys. I can ignore the rumors my friends tell me about who they've seen you with. But now, I can smell her on you. I can tell. I walked over to her side of the bed, kissed her forehead gently, and whispered, I'm sorry. I was inconsiderate. Let me take a shower, and I'll come back to our bed. The next morning was Saturday, and I slept in. It had been a long week, going out every night, trying to juggle everything. I could feel my age, and I just hoped I wouldn't catch a cold or something. Becky woke me up with breakfast, and then asked me about my plans for the weekend. I don't have anything planned, I told her, still sitting at the kitchen table. Timothy, she said, her voice quiet. She reached into her pocket and pulled something out, then knelt down in front of me. She opened her hand, and I saw my wedding ring. Taking my hand, she looked up at me. I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I didn't think everything through, she said, carefully sliding the ring onto my finger. I didn't stop her. I still love you, she whispered, staying kneeling as she waited for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. Do you really feel that way? I asked. She nodded, her eyes full of sincerity. No divorce, she said, her voice firm. What about other men? I asked, unsure where this was going. There's no one else but you, she answered, looking at me. And then, the delicate part. You need to understand, I said. I'll still occasionally see other women. Becky swallowed, and we sat there for a long time, our eyes meeting in silence. In that moment, I realized something about my wife. I was confident in how this would end. Finally, she nodded. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, she said softly. I think I'm in love with you too. I grabbed her and kissed her, passionately. She kissed me back with equal fervor. It turned out that Becky had low self-esteem, something I hadn't fully recognized until now. Over the years, I had treated her well in some ways, but not enough. We had drifted apart, and my biggest mistake was not acknowledging her feelings. Every time she shared something with me, I argued. Do you know how harmful that is? How arrogant it is to tell someone that their feelings aren't true. It built resentment and hostility over time, and eventually, she no longer valued what we had. Maybe that was my fault. Over time, we changed. Well, she changed. I didn't. Why would I want to go back to how things were? I guess she wanted me to, but we both knew we had changed. She understood now that if she chose to walk away, there were others ready to take her place. Do you really have to see other people? She asked, her voice small. I'm not planning to see other men, I replied, giving her a reassuring smile. Yes, I will see others from time to time. You may be my wife, but remember, I'm your husband. I won't forget about you. She smiled and then said, take me to bed and show me what I've been missing. Show me what all these other women get from you. Do you think you have what I need? I teased. I'll just show you my love, she said with a playful smile, and maybe wear you out so much that you won't have energy for any other woman. I picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. We wasted no time, undressing each other with urgency, almost frantic with desire. Our passion exploded as I took her, and then she took me, and then she took me again. At some point, she realized from my stamina that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. After 15 years of marriage, she knew exactly what I could do in bed. For the rest of the day, she had a knowing smile, but I remained silent. What happened with my dates was something I didn't bring up, and neither did she. It was an episode in our lives best left in the past. From then on, I never asked her about the men she had kissed or spoken to. She now looked at me with a newfound reverence and respect. I never would have believed my plan would work, but in the end it did, though not in the way I expected. It wasn't a perfect plan, and at first, I was just too stubborn to let her have the satisfaction of seeing her hurtful words destroy me. When I saw how she reacted to my seeing other women while she stayed at home, I pushed my plan further. I won her back by creating space between us. You want what you don't have, and you take for granted what you do have, are the words I now live by. By freeing both her and myself, we've become closer than we ever were before. As for seeing others, I haven't had to yet. The first sign that Becky is reverting to her old self will prompt my next date. I know this, and she knows this. Together, we're working to not just listen to each other, but to truly hear each other. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. Maria, my wife of 7 years, was on a table in the dining car with Kevin, her friend, screwing her brains out. I looked around, thinking there had to be an attendant or a waiter somewhere, but oddly enough, there wasn't. At that moment, all the love I had for my wife seemed to vanish. This was supposed to be a trip for the two of us to reconnect. I had been surprised when she mentioned that Kevin, a co-worker of hers, would be joining us. She assured me he was a friend to both of us, but I never liked the guy and couldn't understand why he needed to be there. Now, I finally understood. I also knew I would need proof for the divorce. This was the end of us. The sight of them together stirred something in me, but there was no way I was going to tolerate such disrespect. I pulled out my phone and started recording the scene. I had no interest in their conversation, only in getting the evidence I needed. It seemed like they screwed forever on that table. Finally, they stopped and Maria straightened out her dress. We have to be careful, she spoke as they took their seats. If Alistair finds out about us, he won't be happy at all. Ah, screw that cuck, Kevin said with a sneer. We've been screwing for the last year, and he's never found out. What? I thought to myself. This shit's been going on for a year? I knew things had been a bit strained between Maria and I, with my work schedule being so harried, but damn it, that's what kept a roof over our heads. Sure, Maria worked too, but her salary, such as it was, wouldn't pay for things she wanted. Her clothes, accessories, trips to the salon, and so forth. That was the whole idea of taking a few days off to travel a bit by rail and see the sights and spend time in each other's arms. So, are you going to give him sloppy seconds when you get back to him? That would be so wicked, wouldn't it? Did you do like I said about the birth control? He asked. Maria nodded her head. Yeah, I quit taking it so you could knock me up. I told Alistair I was on my period this week, so he won't be expecting any sex. They both had a good laugh at that. So why do you stay with him? Kevin asked. You obviously don't love him, or you wouldn't be doing this to him. Well, it's not that I don't love him. I like him enough, but I just don't have that burning love for him anymore. Besides, he brings in a good paycheck, and you know I couldn't live off what I make. So, you're staying with him for the money. She nodded her head. Pretty much. Hell, I could never afford the accommodations he got on this trip, and neither could you. So, when do you want to get together again? He asked. I don't know, maybe later this evening after he goes to sleep. I saw and heard enough, and ended the video. I made my way back to the sleeper car where Maria and I stayed and considered my options. Divorce was a given, but there had to be something more. Both her and her boyfriend needed to pay. I called Fred, my lawyer. Fred Jurgens, the man said as he answered the call. Fred, this is Alistair Brown. I need you to start preparing divorce papers for me, and I want the prenuptial enforced. Divorce? Fred asked, surprised. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. On what grounds? Fred asked. Adultery. I have video I can send you if you need proof. Yeah, do that. I've got the prenup here, so it shouldn't take too long to get it set up. When do you want her served? The sooner the better. We'll be back in Springfield in a couple days, so maybe you can have her served at the train station. I also need to find out what I can about her boyfriend, Kevin Flanders. He works with her. I'll get our investigator on it. Send me the video, and I'll take a look. Don't do anything stupid. Got it? Yeah, right. You know me. Yeah, I do. That's why I said not to do anything stupid. Fred always made me laugh. We ended the call, and I sent Fred the video. Then I sat back and thought for a minute about what else to do. I pulled out my tablet and connected my phone to it. After transferring the video to the tablet, I turned on the phone's hotspot and used that to connect my tablet to our home network through a virtual private network. I had that set up some time back so I could safely access my files from anywhere in the world. The first thing I did was log into our banking and do the typical dance. Closing joint cards, moving funds around, etc. I didn't want to take any chances, even with the prenuptial agreement. I had another evil thought. Maria liked to use the home computer for her personal emails. Fortunately, she wasn't too bright about things like security, so I was able to log into her webmail account with a couple clicks. I copied the video first to the tablet, then to the home computer. With her webmail client open, I wrote an email, trying to sound like her. I used a cheesy subject line that sounded like her. Check out my fun train trip. In the body, I wrote, check out what I do while my clueless hubby sleeps. I then attached the video to the email and sent it to everyone on her contact list. That's right, friends, family, her coworkers, you name it. I looked it over for a minute, then hit send. Screw it, I thought to myself. I opened the door to our compartment just in time to see one of the attendants. I motioned for him to come over when he looked up at me. Is everything all right, sir? He asked. Well, my wife says she wants to move to another cabin. Can you tell me what cabin a Kevin Flanders is located in? The attendant consulted his tablet for a moment before answering. You want your wife's stuff moved into that cabin? He asked. Are you sure? That's in the economy class and isn't anywhere near as nice as this. That's life. He nodded his head in understanding. I see. Sure, I'll help you get her stuff packed up. We worked fast, not really caring how nice her clothes were packed. Once we finished, I helped the attendant take her stuff to his cabin, which was less than half the size ours is. I laughed as I tossed her things on his little bunk bed. Let her deal with that, I thought to myself. I'll need to make her a new key card. He grabbed a white card out of his pocket and slid it through a magnetic writer connected to his tablet. He looked at me when he finished. Do you know where she is? He asked. I nodded my head. I know where she was the last time I saw her. Led on. We made our way through the train and entered the dining car. Maria and Kevin were still making goo-goo eyes at each other when we came up to them. I sat down in one of the chairs at the table, and the attendant got Maria's attention. Yes? She asked, looking perturbed. I need to give you your new key card and collect the old one. She looked surprised. What do you mean? She asked. Apparently there was a mix-up in cabin assignments, so I need to give you your new key. This guy was as cool as a cucumber, I thought. Aggravated, Maria pulled out her key card and handed it to the attendant. He smiled and gave her the new card. Thank you. Have a nice trip. He turned and walked away. Maria looked at me, angry. What are you doing? She asked. I'm just making it easier for you and Kevin to play around. Her eyes grew wide. What do you mean? She asked. You think I don't know about the two of you? I asked. Maria started to look nervous. She glanced at Kevin and he looked perturbed. He looked at her key card and noticed the cabin number. Wait, that's a key for my cabin. I nodded my head. I figured that way you two wouldn't have to screw on the dining room table. I realize it may be a bit cramped, but that's the way it goes. By the way, did Maria ever tell you about the prenup she signed when we got married? What are you talking about? Kevin asked. Well, if you're going to screw someone's wife, you should find out a little bit about her first, don't you agree? I asked. Look, it was just all in fun. We didn't mean anything. Maria spoke up. That's right, Alistair. It was all just in fun. It doesn't affect our marriage in the slightest. Really? I asked, pulling out my tablet. I advanced the video to the part where they were talking and pressed the play icon. Listen to this. I like him enough, but I just don't have that burning love for him anymore. Besides, he brings in a good paycheck, and you know I couldn't live off what I make, Maria's voice said in the video. So, you're staying with him for the money, Kevin said in the video. She nodded her head. I stopped the video and looked at her. So, bitch. I'm nothing but a walking paycheck to you. Sweetheart, she began. I stopped her. You don't ever get to call me sweetheart, dear, honey, or anything else, bitch. I don't think you should even call me by my first name. I think you should call me Mr. Brown. And since you don't consider yourself married to me, I'll be taking these, I added, pulling her wedding and engagement rings off. And I'll be taking this, I added, grabbing her purse and removing her house key from the large key ring she kept there. I took my wedding ring off and placed it in front of Kevin. You can have this. I have no further need of it. I turned to Kevin. The prenup that she signed, Kevin, says that in the event of infidelity, the guilty party, in this case, Maria, receives absolutely nothing. I'll let her have her clothes and her jewelry. But that's it. I don't think she'll be able to keep up the payments on her car. Fortunately, I had the paperwork done in her name, so it'll be her credit rating that takes a hit. You a-hole, starting to stand up. I grabbed a fork and moved to stab his hand. He sat back down. Don't screw with me. Please, tears welling up in her eyes. Alistair, Mr. Brown, please don't do this. I've learned my lesson. Can't you forgive me and we can put this behind us? No, bitch. Rewinding the video to a point where they began talking about knocking Maria up. I played the video so they both could hear clearly. The two of you have been doing this shit to me for a year. And you plotted to get knocked up by Kevin and pass the kid off as mine. I hissed, looking at Maria. Right now, I hate your guts and I wish to God I'd never laid eyes on you. I looked at Kevin before speaking again. You wanted the lying, cheating 304. You got her. Good luck. I imagine she won't be getting much support from her family and friends. What do you mean? Maria asked. I shrugged my shoulders. Check your email. She pulled out her phone and opened her mobile email app. Her eyes grew wide. What did you do? She asked. I just shared your memories with your family and friends. You looked like you were having such a great time. I just knew you'd love to share it with others. You scumsucker, she hissed. My parents just disowned me and my sister says she never wants to see me again. My friends think I'm a 2-bit 304 and they all hate me now. Can you blame them? I asked calmly. I gave you 7 of the best years of my life. I loved you exclusively all that time and never even thought of another woman. Worked my butt off for you. Bought that big house you just had to have. Bought you that new BMW. I never once complained when you spent all of your money on yourself, and I never complained when you went out supposedly to be with the girls. And what did I get in return? You rip my heart out. You cheat on me, and you kill our marriage. So I don't blame them one bit. Please, just give me another chance, she begged. I shook my head. No. You could have ended this at any time, but you chose not to. So this is the end of the line. You chose your bed, now you get to sleep in it. I hope it was all worth it to you. I expect you'll be served when we hit Springfield. Just sign the papers and be done with it. Then you and Kevin can screw each other to death for all I care. Alistair, Mr. Brown, is there anything I can do to make this up to you? I'll do anything. I stood up and thought for a moment before answering. Yeah, there is one thing. Actually, 2 things. Her eyes lit up in anticipation. Eat shit and die. She collapsed in tears as I turned and walked away. I fought back tears as I made my way back to my cabin. After I closed and locked the door, my phone rang. It was her parents. Apparently, they saw the video I sent them. Alistair, what the hell is going on? Maria's father, Jeffrey, asked. Hi, Jeffrey. I caught your daughter having sex with another man. I took video and I sent it to you. I'm having divorce papers drawn up based on the prenuptial. I expect she'll be served when the train hits Springfield. I wanted you to know why I'm divorcing her. Isn't there any way you can overlook this? He asked. I mean, divorce is so drastic. No, Jeffrey. If you listen to what your daughter and her lover said, you'll know there's no way I can get past her cheating. I'm nothing but a paycheck to her, that's it. She even wanted to have me raise some other man's child. That stupid girl. So, I hear you disowned her. No. I asked her to give me one good reason not to disown her. I'm still waiting. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad that you had us sign that prenup. This probably wasn't the way you envisioned things happening, but you did me a big favor. I'm sorry, Alistair. You're right, and I've since grown to love you like the son I never had. I think the world of you as well. Is there anything we can do? He asked. Actually, there is. Do you guys still have that extra key to the house I gave you? Yes, we do. Would you mind getting a truck and picking up her stuff out of the house? I asked. I won't be in town for another couple days, and I don't want her in the house. I'll reimburse you for the truck. Sure, we can do that. What about her car? You can take that as well, but I'm not sure how long she'll be able to keep it. Maybe you can teach her how to do a budget, or maybe she can trade it in for something she'll be able to afford. Okay. Look, Alistair, I'm really sorry about all this. Not your fault. We said our goodbye and ended the call. The phone rang the second I put it in my pocket. It was Maria's cousin, Leah. I answered the call. What do you want, Leah? I asked. So, you finally know about Maria? She asked. Yeah. I take it you're going to divorce the no-good bitch? She asked. Of course. Already have things in the works. Good. You know I've always had the hots for you. Truth was, I found Leah to be smoking hot as well, but I was married to her cousin, so that made her off limits. Well, you're pretty hot yourself. Leah had this thing about wearing short skirts and tiny, ripped short shorts around me, and it always got me excited. So you have noticed. Of course, I told her. So, now that you've kicked the bitch out, do you think we can hook up? She asked. Maybe once the divorce is final. Okay, I understand. I've waited 7 years for you, so I guess I can wait a few more months. Then I'm going to screw your brains out. I'll see you when you get back. The call ended, leaving me with a hard-on. Something good might come out of all this after all. The next 2 days went by pretty fast for me. Most of my time was spent on the phone. I rarely ventured out of my cabin, so I wouldn't have to face the two cheaters. I had heard from Fred, who told me what I suspected. Kevin Flanders was a well-known womanizer who had been divorced twice for cheating. His last wife had also filed charges of domestic abuse against him. It figured that Maria would gravitate towards someone like that, but I hoped she would wake up in time and leave him. Shortly before the train pulled into Springfield, Maria knocked on my door. Who is it? I asked through the closed door. It's me, Maria. What do you want? I asked. I want my husband back, she cried. Tough shit, bitch. I want a loyal and faithful wife who loves me, but I didn't get that, did I? Please, Alistair. Mr. Brown, I made a mistake, she cried. You went way beyond mistake, bitch. Get out of here before I call security. You're supposed to be in the economy section. Please, she cried. Can't we just talk? No. Go away. I never want to see you again. I heard her sniffle as she walked away. A part of me was sad for her, but I really didn't give a shit. She brought this all on herself with her lying, cheating, and disrespect. I got off the train and looked around to see if I could spot her and Kevin. I saw them a few cars away, getting off the train. Neither one of them looked too happy. Tough shit, I thought to myself. As I looked, a man approached Maria and handed her a manila envelope. She opened it, then collapsed in tears. I smiled and walked away. I got in my car and made my way home. I noticed that Maria's car was gone and all of her stuff had been taken, including a few pieces of furniture she had when we first married. I put my things away and went through the house, taking down all the pictures that included her. I wanted nothing to remind me of the cheating bitch. A couple hours later, I heard a knock on the door. I looked through the window and saw Leah. God, she looked hot in those shorts. I opened the door and let her come in. She carried a large dish of something that smelled like lasagna. She walked in as though she owned the place and set the dish on the kitchen counter. When she turned back to me, I looked her over. I wanted to make sure you had something good to eat. I don't want you to get hungry. Thanks, Leah. I appreciate that. Her eyes sparkled as she smiled. Would you care to stay and have dinner with me? I'd love to. You go get washed up. I know where everything is. I headed upstairs and washed myself up quickly before going back. By the time I got back, the table had already been set, and Leah had even poured us each a glass of wine. I pulled out a chair for her and admired her shapely thighs as she sat down. She grabbed my plate and dished out a nice chunk of lasagna, which was thick with meat and dripping with layers of cheese. This took a lot of work on her part, I thought. After she dished herself a small portion, I looked at her. This looks delicious. Thanks, in response. I love to cook, especially for someone I truly care about. Indeed, the lasagna was as tasty as it looked and I ate every bite, even cleaning the plate with a piece of garlic bread she made. You must have been hungry. There's no way I'm wasting food this good. That was the best lasagna I've ever tasted. She smiled as she came next to me. I'm glad you liked it, sitting in my lap. There's lots more where that came from. And maybe someday I'll even bring you dessert. I need to get home and feed my cat, but I'll be by tomorrow. I can't wait. She smiled as she stood. This is just a preview of what I have in store for you. I guess I'll just have to let little Alistair take care of me until your divorce is final. Little Alistair? I asked. That's what I call my toy. I like to fantasize about you screwing me while I use it on myself. I see. Well, let's hope Maria doesn't fight the divorce. We kissed for a while before Leah left. Fortunately, Maria didn't fight the divorce. Apparently, she realized I had her dead to rights and decided to end the marriage. The two of them were able to keep their jobs, but from what I heard, it was by the skin of their teeth. She signed the paperwork and called me to apologize and tell me that it was a done deal. Fred called to let me know the signed papers were filed and I would be a free man in 30 days. Was I happy? I was glad to be rid of a cheating 304 of a wife, but a part of me felt like something was missing. I had loved this woman exclusively for years and had hoped to retire with her, surrounded by children and grandchildren. But that wasn't meant to be. I was also frustrated that I hadn't gotten any revenge on Kevin. I had thought about filing for alienation of affection, but Fred said that was a waste of time. I thought about beating him to a pulp, but decided against it, since I had desire to go to jail. Leah came by every evening with something she had prepared, and we would share the evening meal. She even marked my calendar, counting down the days until the divorce would become final. I knew that I had to be with this woman for the rest of my life. She must have thought the same thing. She turned on her side and looked me in the eye. I've always loved you, Alistair. I'll never do to you what my stupid cousin did. I want to spend the rest of my life right here with you. So, does that mean you'll marry me? I asked. She smiled and threw her arms around me. Yes, baby. I'll marry you and make you the happiest man on earth. We kissed and made love some more before falling asleep in each other's arms. A few days later, I got a call from Maria's father. Leah and I had just finished making love and were laid back on the bed, watching a movie while sharing a bowl of popcorn. Alistair, Maria's in the hospital. I sat up, surprised. What happened? I asked. That a-hole she's with beat her half to death. I told her to call the cops, but she refused. Is she going to be okay? I asked. Eventually, but I don't think she will be for long if she stays with him. All right, we'll head over and check it out. We? Her father asked. Yeah, Leah and I. Leah's there with you? He asked. Yeah, I couldn't have gotten through this without her. Okay, I understand. I'll meet you at the hospital. After we ended the call, I explained to Leah what happened and told her what I had learned about Kevin Flanders. We were both pissed at Maria for what she did, but neither one of us wanted her physically hurt. We cleaned up, dressed, and headed to the hospital. After talking to the nurse, we were led to her room. She looked horrible. Her face was black and blue, and one eye was swollen shut. One arm was in a cast, and an IV was dripping fluid in the other. She moaned weakly as we came into the room. I wanted to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, but didn't. Mr. Brown, a tear streaming down her cheek. I held up my hand to stop her. Alistair is fine. What happened? Kevin wanted to use my car to take his date out, and I told him no slowly. He got pissed off and started hitting me, calling me names. I told him that was my car and nearly half of my check goes to making the payments, and there's no way I'd let him use it to impress some 304. He wouldn't stop beating me until I threatened to call 911. That's when he took off. I don't know where he is. I had a real hard time breathing and my chest hurt real bad, so I called 911 and they came and brought me here. Did you tell the cops what happened? Leah asked. No, I was afraid to. I thought if he was taken to jail, he'd kill me when he got out. I shook my head at the bullshit I was hearing. So let me get this right. You run off to live with the guy you were cheating on me with, and he's now cheating on you. Is that right? She sobbed as she nodded her head. Yeah, I really screwed up, didn't I? Yes, you did. But you don't deserve this. He committed a crime, and he needs to be locked up. Maria, did you know he has a history of domestic violence? I knew he could be a bit rough, but no, I didn't. Leah wrapped her arms around her cousin and tried to comfort her. Maria noticed the diamond ring on her finger. Are you engaged? Maria asked. Leah smiled and nodded her head. Yeah, Alistair and I are getting married. Maria began sobbing, her tears soaking Leah's t-shirt. But you're still my cousin, and I still love you even though I think you're a stupid bitch for what you did to Alistair. Just then, Maria's parents came into the room. They were furious when Leah and I told them what happened. All right, Jeffrey told Maria. We'll stay here with you, and we'll move you back into the house when you get discharged. You'll stay with us until you can get back on your feet. He looked at me and motioned me into the hallway. What do you know about this Flanders guy? He asked. I told him what I had learned from Fred, and he nodded his head, taking mental notes. And you say he works with Maria? Yes. He nodded his head some more. Okay, I'll take care of Flanders. I'm not going to get into it with you. You don't need to know the details, trust me. What's with you and Leah? Well, she helped me get through the divorce and we're now engaged. He smiled as he nodded his head. I'm not surprised. She's always had a thing for you. Congratulations. At least you'll still be a part of the family. Thanks. Is there anything I can do to help with Flanders? He shook his head. No, I got this covered. Besides, you're going to be married soon and the last thing Leah needs is to have her new husband in jail. The less you know, the better. Jeffrey went down the hall, talking to someone on his cell phone. I headed back into Maria's room. Maria's mother looked at us. I'll stay with her tonight. Jeffrey will arrange to get her things from that man's apartment. Thank you for coming by. You're welcome. Giving her a hug. Maria looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. For everything. Can you forgive me? I thought for a moment before speaking. I think so, cognizant of the two other women looking at me. After all, we're still going to be family. Thank you. I walked over and gave her a goodbye hug. You get well, lightly kissing her forehead. Take good care of him, Maria told Leah. Please. Leah smiled and nodded her head. I intend to. We left the hospital and headed home. I had no idea what Jeffrey had in mind regarding Kevin, but I had heard stories about his time in the military. I also knew he had friends in high and low places, so I kept an eye on the local news, even checking the obituaries. I didn't see anything there, but a small story did pop up in the local paper a week later about a man getting mugged and severely beaten outside a local bar. According to the story, the man, identified as Kevin Flanders, was confronted by a group of men who ended up breaking 3 of his ribs, his jaw, a kneecap, and an arm. The story also said something about his testicles getting severely injured. I had to laugh at that. Jeffrey got Maria's things from the apartment and moved her back into his home. Her parents hated what she did to me, but she was still their daughter and they still loved her. Leah and I married a couple months later. Since her parents had died several years ago in a car crash, Jeffrey walked her down the aisle and shook my hand. Maria came with her parents and cried as the preacher pronounced us husband and wife. We had a great honeymoon in Las Vegas, where Leah screwed my brains out as often as she could. After we got back, we moved her things into the house. She decided that since I made more than enough for the two of us, she would quit her job. I have a new job now, she said. What kind of job? I asked. Keeping you happy, she replied with a wicked smile. And she certainly did. But a few months later, she hit me with those 4 words every husband dreads. We need to talk? I walked in after work, feeling uneasy. Is something wrong? I asked, bracing myself for bad news. Well, we're going to need to remodel one of the bedrooms, she said, smiling. Why? I asked, confused. Because you're going to be a daddy. I couldn't contain my joy. I picked her up and kissed her all over her face. Are you happy? She asked. I'm the happiest man alive, I said. Then take me upstairs and show me just how happy you are, big guy. And I did. Yeah, sometimes life hands you lemons, but other times, it gives you something much sweeter. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.